Hey guys, tonight we slip into something terribly uncomfortable. History, myth, and the kind of divine boredom that ends up changing the world. You're reclining somewhere between consciousness and dreams, and across the cosmos, so is Dionysus. Except unlike you, he's not trying to sleep, he's just deeply, theatrically bored. You'd think being a Greek god of wine, madness, ecstasy, and general party starter duties, would be enough to keep a guy occupied. But no, not today. You picture it now, Mount Olympus, gleaming white pillars perched high above mortal affairs. The sky is crisp, the ambrosia is flowing, and immortality stretches out forever. You'd probably last a week up there before your brain started to melt from the sameness of it all. Dionysus. He's centuries into this divine stasis. One golden afternoon, he lies sprawled on a cushion of purple silk, his ivy crown slipping sideways, staring at nothing in particular. He's surrounded by celestial fruit platters, snoring nymphs, and a harpist who's been stuck on the same chord progression since 350 BCE. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can practically hear the sigh as Dionysus kicks off a sandal, which glides lazily down a cloud bank and lands, improbably, in Athena's art garden. Somewhere below, mortals pray for harvests, argue over sheep boundaries, and swear by his name in toasts. But that's all background static now, he's done it all. The festivals, the orgies, the ecstatic trance dancing, it's grown dull. His last great amusement was starting a mystery cult just to see what would happen if no one explained the rules. Spoiler. People still joined because humans are weird like that. This god of wine and liberation with his leopard-drawn chariot and fluttering thyrsus staff is having what modern therapists might call an existential episode. But gods don't get therapists, they get visions or migraines. Hard to tell. He lounges so hard the marble beneath him groans. He ponders setting something on fire, not out of malice, just out of sheer curiosity. What would Zeus do if he turned Poseidon's entire wardrobe into sea foam? That might amuse him for 5 minutes, maybe 6 if Poseidon cried. Then, in a moment of divine drift, his eyes settle on the horizon. Clouds part just enough to reveal the mortal world. Tiny villages, smoky little hearths, winding goat paths, and humans. Endlessly dramatic humans. They argue, they weep, they shout to the skies like thunder has ears. Dionysus watches one young man fall to his knees because his neighbor insulted his fig tree. Another woman faints from heartbreak because someone forgot her name at a feast. They're hilarious and sincere, and messy in the way the gods no longer get to be. He props his chin on one hand, elbow in a puddle of spilled nectar. Why should they get to have all the drama? This, by the way, is your first hint. That little spark in his voice? That is boredom being alchemized into something a bit more theatrical. Historians still argue whether Dionysus invented theatre as a gift to humans or as a joke he forgot to end. Either way, the gears begin to turn. He's tried inspiring poetry before, but that got away from him and turned into tragic odes about Cyclops' unrequited love, and epic poems no one finishes reading. He'd once enchanted a vine to whisper lullabies, but vines are terrible singers. The satyrs are no help. They're still trying to invent a new kind of flute that sounds like screaming goats. It's all noise, no structure, no payoff. What Dionysus wants is something better, something with entrance music, a beginning, a middle, and an end, something mortals can watch, absorb, feel, and perhaps most importantly, applaud. And so you sit here now, in this sleepy reverie, knowing that somewhere between cloud watching and wine sipping, a bored god is about to reinvent your favorite Netflix binge, and all because he couldn't find anything decent to watch. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the section. Ancient Greeks really did believe Dionysus inspired drama, especially tragedy. In fact, most of the major dramatic festivals in Athens were held in his honor. The biggest one? The city Dionysia, essentially the Cannes Film Festival of 5th century BCE Athens, but with more masks and fewer press junkets. Now for the quirky tidbit. Dionysus was often depicted in art, lounging with his head tilted dramatically, sometimes even asleep, while chaos unfolded around him. Imagine the energy of someone setting fire to a village while yawning. Iconic. And just so we don't get too comfy in our certainty, let's toss in an open scholarly debate. Some researchers argue that Dionysus didn't create theatre, but that his ecstatic rites just happened to involve emotional storytelling, masks and music, which, over time, formalized into performance. Others think the whole mythological angle was tacked on later to add flair. But for tonight, in this version of events, Dionysus lies there, watching mortals like reality TV, the first seed of an idea blooming somewhere between his eyebrows. Maybe, he thinks, it's time to visit the humans. Just a casual trip, nothing major, just see what happens if he drops a few ideas like planting vines in soil or rumours in taverns. It's a lazy plan, which means it's perfect. You're still drifting gently beside Dionysus, reclining with him on that celestial patio, when he finally sits up. The sudden motion startles a nearby nymph, who tumbles into a harp. Somewhere in the distance, a thundercloud shaped like Zeus sighs with disapproval. Dionysus doesn't care. He's stretching now, arms overhead, fingers wiggling, like a cat considering mischief. Because when boredom turns into intent, things start to get interesting. What can a god of madness, revelry, and transformation possibly do for entertainment when the gods around him are so spectacularly dull? Hermes is too busy running messages in winged sandals and giggling at inside jokes, only he understands. Athena's off inventing new armor techniques again, probably made from owl feathers. Even Ares is just yelling at boulders in a corner, trying to stay sharp. Ugh. Dionysus rolls his eyes so hard you can almost hear the celestial friction. He thinks, time to stir the pot. His first move? Chucking a bunch of grapes at Apollo. Apollo, lying nearby with his perfect curls and more perfect ego, doesn't even flinch. The grapes bounce off his golden shoulder plate and roll across the marble like lazy marbles. Must you? Apollo mutters, adjusting his lyre. Dionysus grins. Must I? No. Will I? Yes. Because when the god of the sun is this self-serious, what choice do you have but to pelt him with fruit? Still, it doesn't scratch the itch. He needs something grander. Next, Dionysus decides to hold impromptu leopard chariot races across the skies. He shouts down to his feline companions, leopards named Drama and Climax, and attaches them to a golden chariot he hasn't used since the last solar eclipse. The leopards yawn. One of them is wearing earrings now. How did that happen? You float beside him as he zooms across Olympus, wind in his curls, yelling things like, "I am speed," and "Thespians, assemble," though no one has any idea what that second one means yet. He loops the chariot twice around the sun, which prompts Helios to file a noise complaint. Then Dionysus tries to leap Mount Parnassus, forgets to steer, and lands in Artemis's favorite deer sanctuary. Oops! Naturally, Artemis threatens him with an arrow tipped in ancient sarcasm. Dionysus throws up his hands and says it was a performance piece, which isn't even that far from the truth. And now you're watching this celestial being, equal parts chaos and charisma, tumble through the heavens with increasing theatrical flair. Because let's face it, he's acting out. Theatrics before theatre. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Dionysus wasn't always a top-tier Olympian. He was a later addition, not part of the original 12. That's right. Your favourite drama king started as a bit of a fringe god. Many myths paint him as an outsider, a wanderer, someone always slightly out of place among his more traditional, battle-hardened kin. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some versions of the myth, Dionysus is followed everywhere by a donkey named Onos. Not a warhorse. A flaming chariot? A donkey. Imagine the god of ecstasy showing up to your village like a traveling performer on a donkey named Onos. That's pure divine confidence. Now for our obligatory scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Dionysus represents liberation from order or just a different kind of control. Some claim his myths were designed to regulate chaos through ritual. Others insist he was all about embracing chaos in its rawest form. Either way, he does not fit into a tidy philosophical box, unless that box is covered in ivy and contains a complimentary goblet of wine. Back in your story, Dionysus is pacing now, well, gliding more than pacing. He hovers over the mortal world, peering down with intense curiosity, and you follow his gaze. The people below are building things: mud huts, stone temples, awkward little stages made from hay bales and wishful thinking. They sing, they shout, they hold village gatherings where stories are told loudly, often with bad impressions of angry gods. Dionysus is delighted. He nearly claps. "Look at them," he mutters to no one in particular. "So dramatic, so messy, so watchable." And then it hits him, the idea, capital I, not just mischief, not just chaos for chaos's sake, but something sustainable, something repeatable. A gift, a gift, no, a mechanism for giving humans permission to let all their emotions out in public, loudly, together. He thinks of masks, of chants, of scripted outbursts followed by cathartic silence. He thinks, what if pain could be performed? What if joy could be summoned with a line of verse? He thinks theatre, it's almost too perfect. At this point, Dionysus is vibrating with glee. He pours himself another goblet of wine, mostly because it's tradition, and swirls it like a magician preparing a spell. He leans forward, close enough to the edge of Olympus that his hair brushes a passing rain cloud. "You there," he says softly, voice carrying across the wind. "Are you ready for a story?" And just like that, a new chapter of mortal culture begins, entirely because an immortal got bored enough to reinvent the concept of shared emotion. You're watching a god in the act of invention, and he doesn't even know its history yet. So now Dionysus has the seed of a plan, a glimmering notion wrapped in silk and fermented grape juice. He doesn't quite know what it is yet, but he can feel it vibrating under his skin like a poem trying to rhyme itself. The idea keeps growing, much like his hair when he forgets to divine salon it. He floats down from Olympus one lazy afternoon, not in a blaze of godly splendor, but as a mortal-looking traveler with a sly grin, a wide-brimmed hat, and a walking stick shaped suspiciously like a snake eating a flute. He lands somewhere near Thebes, because of course he does. Thebes is always conveniently dramatic. You follow him through a golden haze, the heat shimmering off the dry earth. The mortals don't recognize him, not really, but there's always something just a little off. His eyes a bit too violet, his skin too smooth for a man who claims to herd goats. He saunters into town like a man who invented leisure, which, to be fair, he sort of did. He chats with an old woman carrying a basket of olives. He compliments a donkey on its posture. He offers a fig to a child, who suspiciously sniffs it and runs away screaming, which Dionysus takes as a rave review. What he's looking for is not an audience, not yet. First, he wants inspiration. Fuel. Some weird little spark to turn this growing daydream into something with a stage and structure. That's when it happens, under a fig tree no less, which feels poetically lazy. He's seated in the shade, chewing on honeyed dates and watching a pair of shepherds argue over who owns a goat that has clearly chosen freedom. Their back and forth is oddly rhythmic. One shouts, the other retorts. There's pacing, gesturing, even some stomping. It's a performance and they don't even know it. Then one of them yells, "You can't handle the truth about this goat." And something clicks. Maybe it's a divine spark. Maybe it's the fig fermenting in his belly. Either way, Dionysus lets out a soft, delighted giggle. The shepherds pause, eye him warily, and go back to shouting. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. The term theatron, the root of our modern word theatre, literally means a place for seeing in Greek. It wasn't just about listening to stories. It was a visual, communal, public act. You went to see things that couldn't happen anywhere else. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some Greek cities, theatre was so central that people were paid to attend plays. That's right, subsidized sadness and state-sponsored comedy. Imagine your government giving you $5 to go feel things in a marble amphitheater. Now, for the scholarly uncertainty, some academics argue that early Greek drama evolved from Dionysian ritual dances and chanted hymns, dithyrambs, while others believe it sprang more organically from community storytelling traditions. Either way, the line between party and performance was always suspiciously blurry. Much like Dionysus's relationship with boundaries, back under the fig tree he begins to monologue, not to anyone in particular, just to the air. He begins slowly, his voice warm and rolling, each phrase ending in a question that doesn't want an answer. He talks about fate and goats, about wine and betrayal, about the colour of regret and why sandals always break when you're running from your problems. It's all nonsense, or it should be. But the words seem to shimmer. Soon a few locals gather around, a shepherd, a potter, an old woman who claims to have met Medusa's cousin once. They sit, blinking, tilting their heads. No one understands quite what he's saying, but they feel something, a rising, a shifting. Someone offers him wine, which he accepts with a flourish. Another asks him, "Is this a story?" He replies, "Hey, it's a beginning." They think he means of the tale, but he means of everything. And you, dreaming gently now, can feel that ancient breeze roll through the grass as Dionysus begins crafting the rules. No, not rules, rhythms. He decides there should be a stage, a performer, and space between them and the watchers, but not too much. He decides the audience should laugh and cry and be confused and fall in love with the wrong character, maybe twice. He calls it the play in his mind, because the emotional roller coaster of mortal existence, live and unscripted, feels a bit wordy. And just to lock it in, he sprinkles a little divine influence. The next traveller who walks into the village finds themselves drawn to that fig tree, feeling like maybe they could stand up and say something, anything, with feeling. You watch the god smile as the breeze carries away his words like seeds. He doesn't know it yet, but in this moment, he's accidentally invented actors. You're still lingering by that fig tree, where the shadows stretch long and lazy across the packed dirt. Dionysus leans against the trunk now, wine cup in hand, watching with open amusement as a small cluster of villagers continues to gather. The ones who first wandered up are still seated, eyes glassy in that way people get when they've been quietly transformed but don't quite realize it yet. And now others are joining. Traders back from market, a boy dragging a goat, a woman with a basket of onions who clearly only meant to stop for a moment but forgot to leave. And this is when Dionysus makes his next move. He raises a hand, not dramatically, just a casual little flick, like he's brushing away a fly, but the air shifts, the wind holds its breath, the fig tree rustles politely, and he begins again. This time he speaks with rhythm, pacing, echo. He asks strange questions and answers them himself. He shifts his tone mid-sentence. He walks in a wide circle and returns to where he began, pausing just long enough to make the crowd lean forward. And then, Goat Farmer interrupts him. The man is short, sunburned, and deeply unimpressed. He squints at Dionysus like someone inspecting a suspicious melon. Then, without ceremony, he blurts, "Why are you talking like that? Is this a sermon? A joke? Are we supposed to clap?" A beat of silence. Dionysus blinks once. Then he laughs, loud and long and delighted. It echoes through the olive grove like bells made of wine. "Oh, friend," he says, wiping tears from his eyes, "you just invented criticism." But the interruption doesn't ruin the moment. It makes it. The crowd chuckles. Someone whispers, "I like the goat man." And another murmurs, "I like the weird poem about sandals." Just like that, sides are chosen, opinions formed, preferences born. And so, unknowingly, the village performs its first play. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The word tragedy comes from the Greek tragoedia, which literally means goat song. Scholars still debate whether this referred to goats as prizes, sacrificial animals, or characters in early performances, but the goat was definitely involved. Yes, ancient drama has always had a weird goat phase, your quirky tidbit. In some ancient rituals honoring Dionysus, participants actually dressed up as satyrs or goats and performed ecstatic dances, complete with masks and tail wagging. These were not subtle performances. They involved stomping, howling, and frequent partial nudity. Basically, ancient Burning Man with more livestock. As for the ongoing debate, historians still argue whether the first play was a structured act with lines and characters, or just a naturally evolving ritual turned dramatic over time. Some think it started as a communal hymn with improvised moments. Others believe someone like Dionysus, mischievous, imaginative, slightly drunk, decided to codify it. Back in the village, Dionysus turns to the goat farmer and raises his cup. "You," he says grandly, "are now the antagonist." The man frowns. "Is that good?" Dionysus shrugs. "It depends how it ends." There's more laughter. The villagers begin chatting amongst themselves, reenacting bits of the performance. One woman imitates Dionysus's dramatic pacing. A young man clutches his chest and stumbles backward, muttering about sandals and heartbreak. An elderly auntie begins to hum a slow chant, and others join in, turning the fig grove into a rehearsal space. Dionysus leans back on his elbows and lets it unfold. The seeds are taking root faster than he expected, but something's still missing. You watch as his gaze drifts upward toward the setting sun. The sky is turning honey and rose. Shadows are stretching like lazy dancers across the earth. And Dionysus murmurs, mostly to himself, "They need structure, ritual, something sacred, and slightly ridiculous." He considers introducing masks, or costumes, or wine-fueled chants, probably all three. The next morning, he walks into the village square and proclaims he's starting a new tradition. "Once a month," he announces, "there will be a gathering, a competition, a storytelling event." The villagers blink. "The winner," he adds, "will receive this perfectly average goat." Gasps, whispers. Everyone wants the goat. No one knows why. And just like that, the tradition begins. Here's what you don't expect. It works immediately. People begin preparing stories, practicing voices, experimenting with masks made from bark and soot. Children rehearse in corners. Elders give unsolicited acting advice. Someone tries to train the goat to bow. Dionysus, meanwhile, drinks and watches and smiles, because the moment they start performing for each other, not just with each other, the transformation becomes irreversible. They're no longer just telling stories, they're creating theatre. And so you drift beside this sleepy little revolution, feeling the soft clink of clay cups, the thump of bare feet dancing out emotion, the low hum of a new art form being born, not with trumpets, but with fig trees, hecklers, and exactly one goat. It's the third morning of this strange little festival when things truly begin to spiral in the best possible way. You're still hovering nearby, wrapped in dreamlike quiet, watching villagers rehearse in the dust with a kind of frantic sincerity. One woman is reciting lines to a tomato. A child is painting their face with charcoal and saying, "I am the spirit of the wind," which sounds impressive until you realize they've been saying it for 10 minutes straight. And Dionysus. He's lounging beneath his usual fig tree, sipping something suspiciously amber-colored from a wooden cup. He looks utterly serene until he suddenly leaps up, points a thyrsus stick at the sky, and shouts, "We forgot the wine!" The villagers blink, then cheer, and so it is declared, no performance shall occur without wine. It is not a rule, it is a law. The children immediately assign themselves as official wine assistants, a title that mostly involves carrying tiny clay jugs and looking very proud. Dionysus beams, because he knows this is what theatre needs. Ritual, Not just words and gestures, but flow, structure, pageantry, pre-performance nerves. Before the story even starts, you feel the moment building. That's what wine does. It loosens the tongue, blurs the edges, fills the silence between acts. And it's also, conveniently, a way for Dionysus to sneak his own divine juice into the mix. Your mainstream historical fact here is this. In ancient Greece, especially during the city Dionysia in Athens, wine wasn't just available, it was practically required. Before the plays began, libations were poured in honor of Dionysus. Drinking wasn't just encouraged, it was sacred. Tipsy reverence was part of the experience. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some amphorae, ancient Greek wine jugs, were decorated with tiny instructions for drinking games or lyrics to popular songs. Imagine sipping your theatre wine and reading, "If you love me, sip twice. If not, sip 4 times and lie." The ancient world was not without its chaotic charms. Back in the fig tree village, the wine flows freely, and Dionysus tries something new. He wanders over to a group rehearsing a sad story about a man who lost his favorite sandals and found meaning in a puddle. It's beautifully performed, but something is missing. "Not bad," Dionysus says, nodding thoughtfully. "But what if you sang that bit about the puddle?" The performer blinks. "Yeah, sang it?" "Yes, with feeling and tremolo, maybe a tragic hand gesture." The actor tries it, and suddenly the air thickens. People lean in. A chorus of oohs. Someone begins to hum softly in the background. A goat sneezes dramatically. And there it is, the shift, the moment when speech becomes song, story becomes ritual, and performance turns into shared emotion. Dionysus grins. "Wine first," he mutters to himself, "then words." This becomes a pattern. Every performance now opens with a toast, sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered. The performers line up to drink, then launch into their tales. The audience knows the rhythm: wine, pause, breath, begin. There's even a chant that develops, passed quietly from lips to lips. "To Dionysus, Lord of Masks, may your wine be strong and your actors louder." It's silly, it's sacred, it's perfect. And while all this unfolds, Dionysus does what Dionysus does best. He watches with that unfocused intensity of someone who knows they've started something bigger than they can contain. Here's your scholarly debate for this round. Experts still argue whether Greek theatre evolved from drunken ritual song, dithyrambs, or simply incorporated those traditions into something newer. Were plays just sobered up versions of party chants? Or were they always their own thing? The answer is likely both. Because theatre, like wine, rarely ferments in a straight line. Back under the fig trees, someone brings Dionysus a carved wooden mask. It's rough, almost comically exaggerated, with wide eyes and a giant frown. The craftsman bows awkwardly. "It's for the sad play," he explains. "We thought it might help." Dionysus takes the mask, runs his fingers over its ridges and holds it up to his face. The effect is immediate. The children gasp. One adult drops a cup. Because with the mask on, Dionysus no longer looks like a man. He looks like a story. The mask removes identity. It strips away self-consciousness. Behind it, any performer can be anything: a widow, a king, a god, a fool. It's not a disguise, it's a doorway. "Excellent," he whispers. And so masks become part of the ritual. Some are happy, some are tragic, some are grotesque enough to startle birds out of trees. But all serve the same purpose: to let the actor transform, to let the audience believe. It's late evening when the first first full, wine-fueled, mask-wearing performance occurs. The villagers are packed tightly around a makeshift stage, a few crates, and a bedsheet strung between 2 olive trees. The play is chaotic. Someone forgets their lines. A mask falls off mid-monologue. The goat walks across the stage and steals a prop. And yet, it works. People laugh, people weep, people clap. Yes, that's right. Clapping is born that night, quite possibly as an accident when someone's wine jug slips and they try to pretend they meant to applaud. But it catches on fast. Dionysus nods in approval, because that too becomes part of the magic. The sun barely rises the next day before the fig grove is bustling again. There's a buzz in the air, not from bees or wine-induced hallucinations this time, but something sturdier, anticipation. You drift gently alongside the action, watching as sleepy villagers rub their eyes, clutch their cloaks, and stumble out to claim seats made of overturned baskets and bundled straw. Someone's brought a flute. Someone else is trying to organize seating by emotional temperament. Tragics on the left, comedics on the right. No one listens. Dionysus, naturally, is late. He eventually appears with a crown of grape leaves tilted rakishly on his curls, wine in one hand, a goat-shaped mask dangling from the other. His entrance is so casual it loops back around to theatrical, and that's when the real spectacle begins, because today is festival day, or at least the first version of one. The villagers are calling it the big story thing, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But give it a few centuries, it'll evolve. This morning's performance is already different. There's now a chorus. No one's entirely sure how the chorus came to be. Maybe someone thought the stage looked empty. Maybe a group of gossip-loving aunties decided to narrate loudly from the sidelines until someone gave them official roles. Regardless, they now stand in a tidy line, draped in matching cloaks, each holding a staff for no apparent reason. Their job? To comment, to react, to chant responses in perfect unison even when they don't agree. Your mainstream historical fact. Greek theatre developed the use of the chorus as a core feature of early plays. The chorus often represented the voice of the people or a collective conscience. They didn't just fill space, they shaped the drama. At one point, the chorus could have up to 50 members. Imagine 50 synchronized people narrating your bad decisions. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the original chorus leaders wore animal skins and danced in a circle around an altar, which may be why early performances had a circular stage, the orchestra. So yes, theatre might have begun with a bunch of people in animal costumes yelling rhythmically at a rock. In today's village production, the chorus is made up of 7 enthusiastic locals, 1 goat, still unclear on its purpose, and a woman who refuses to chant but insists on humming ominously. They practice their "oh no" lines with great care, trying out different levels of theatrical distress. The first play of the day is called The Man Who Cried at Cheese, a tragicomic tale of a man who loses his prized cheese wheel to a vengeful breeze and finds solace in a vineyard. It's strangely moving. Half the audience cries, the other half cries from laughter. Dionysus watches, utterly delighted. His fingers drum on his wine cup. He's plotting. You can see it in the twitch of his eyebrow. This could be more than a village oddity. This could be a movement, but to spread it beyond one grove, he'll need to package the chaos. He needs a festival. And so, as the second play begins, The 3 Sandals of Regret, Dionysus whispers to the nearest chorus member, "What if we did this every year?" The chorus member, a sheep shearer by trade, blinks. Every year? With better masks, a bigger stage, prizes. Goat prizes. Goat prizes, and the idea takes hold. That night, under flickering torchlight and a full moon that seems oddly amused, Dionysus sketches out the rules. Performers will register. There will be a theme: love, war, betrayal, sandals. The crowd will vote with laurel leaves or pomegranate seeds. The winner receives a goat, a clay amphora, and the right to name the next festival. A few logistical problems arise. 1. Someone tries to enter the contest with a story that's just 15 minutes of screaming. 2. The goat eats one of the amphorae. 3. A rival village arrives and insists on performing their own version of The Man Who Cried at Cheese, but with a twist ending involving betrayal and fire. But even these hiccups add to the legend. The audience loves the mayhem. And Dionysus? He steps back, hands behind his back, grinning so hard his cheeks ache. Because it's working. Here's your scholarly debate while we're at it. Historians still argue whether Greek theatre was born more from religious necessity or social experimentation. Was it always meant to honor Dionysus? Or did people simply love performing and backfill the divine purpose later to make it sound important? Either way, the earliest formal performances took place in his name, under his blessing, and probably under the influence of his wine. Back in the grove, the last play of the day ends in thunderous applause. Someone invents clapping faster, and another person responds with what might be the first ever standing ovation. A child cries because their favorite character died. The goat bows. No one taught it to do that. Dionysus raises his cup. To stories, he says. To chaos, someone else adds. To cheese, shouts the chorus, slightly off topic. And with that, the villagers disperse into the night, tipsy, transformed, and utterly unaware that they've just participated in the earliest rehearsal of what will one day become world theatre. You fall asleep somewhere in the space between myth and memory, the laughter still echoing under the stars. The next morning in the fig grove is quiet, but it's not the silence of absence. It's the kind of thick, post-celebration hush that hangs in the air like incense. You float beside Dionysus, who is now sprawled sideways across 3 cushions and half of a picnic rug, one sandal missing, one eye open. His leopard, Climax, is curled at his feet, snoring like a lazy thundercloud. He doesn't need to open both eyes to know something has changed. It's in the way the villagers walk, heads a little higher, gestures more exaggerated. You overhear a potter asking the butcher whether he's considered tone when telling his dreams. Even the goats seem more expressive today. This, Dionysus thinks, is the afterglow of performance. But now he has a new dilemma: structure. He can't keep teleporting into random villages hoping for good lighting and dramatic interruptions. No, he needs something formal, something recurring, a place, a time, a name. And so he dreams up the city Dionysia, though he doesn't call it that yet. He just mumbles something about a really big play party with grapes and possibly a parade, and lets the mortals sort out the details. Meanwhile, another group arrives, outsiders. You watch them arrive, curious pilgrims from a nearby port town, lured by rumour and the faint, persistent sound of rehearsed weeping. They're sceptical at first. Who wouldn't be? Walking into a grove of wine-splashed villagers chanting about lost cheese and destiny. But skepticism doesn't last long in Dionysus's orbit. They sit down, they watch, and then they start performing. Soon, the little fig grove is overwhelmed. Actors from other towns bring their own traditions, different masks, new rhythms, weird metaphors about ducks. The local performers respond by inventing stage names and overacting. Someone introduces props, someone else invents dramatic lighting by spinning a reflective plate at sunset. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The city Dionysia in Athens, established around the 6th century BCE, was a formal, state-sponsored festival honoring Dionysus. It featured multiple days of performances, including tragedies, comedies, and satyr plays. It was a big deal. Think Coachella meets Shakespeare, with more shouting and fewer food trucks. And your quirky tidbit, during the festival, business in Athens literally paused. Even prisoners were temporarily released so they could attend the performances, because apparently watching a tragic hero spiral into doom was seen as essential civic duty. Back in the grove, the scale of performance is escalating. Someone constructs a crude stage out of wine crates. There's now a director whose job seems to be yelling again but louder every 30 seconds. Audiences bring food, cushions, and unsolicited critiques. Dionysus, ever the visionary, realizes this is getting out of hand in the best way. He declares, this is no longer a pastime, it is a calling. Then he falls off a stool. But his point stands. The villagers begin organizing themselves into troops, small groups dedicated to storytelling, complete with team colors and rivalries. Some are solemn, some comedic, some deeply, confusingly interpretive. One troupe performs a 3-act tragedy about a cursed cabbage. Another tells the tale of 2 lovers separated by a sneeze. You chuckle to yourself watching a performance where an actor delivers a monologue to a jar of olives while wearing a mask that looks suspiciously like Dionysus himself. He doesn't mind. In fact, he claps the loudest. And then comes the big shift. One of the visiting performers, a lanky man with a squeaky voice and enormous hands, climbs onto a cart and begins reciting alone. No chorus, no mask, just him, speaking directly to the audience. The crowd stills. He becomes three characters in one monologue, changing posture, voice and mood with dazzling speed. One moment he's a weeping father, the next a vengeful goddess.
Evil goddess, then a confused chicken. It is electric, confusing, brilliant, and that man's name is, according to legend, Thespis. Yes, that Thespis. Here's your scholarly debate for this stretch. Historians credit Thespis as the first actor to step away from the chorus and speak as a character, giving birth to individual acting. But some argue that others may have done it earlier, and Thespis simply got better PR. Either way, his name lives on in thespian, a fancy way to say actor who probably cries professionally. Dionysus watches Thespis with gleaming eyes. This is new. This is the next layer, character. Instead of telling stories about heroes, now someone can be the hero. He's moved, he's inspired, he's already planning ways to make it even more dramatic. Maybe lightning, maybe a play that ends in complete silence, maybe a play with no ending at all, just whine. Meanwhile, the other troops are both impressed and offended. The chorus groups feel threatened.
One particularly loud troupe insists, "We invented tragic sobbing, thank you very much. It doesn't matter, the transformation is unstoppable now." The idea of solo performance catches fire. Villagers begin writing monologues on clay tablets. Children perform speeches to livestock. The fig tree becomes the sacred first stage, and people leave little masks there as offerings. The grapevine whispers spread, there is a new art, a new way to be seen. And so theatre takes another leap from chorus to character, from grove to city, from hobby to cultural pillar. And all the while Dionysus reclines beneath his tree, sipping from a goblet that never seems to empty, watching the world reshape itself around an idea that began simply because he was bored. By now, the fig grove has become almost unrecognizable. Where once a few curious villagers gathered to sip wine and shout stories under the branches, there now stands a bustling miniature amphitheater carved from packed earth and benches of sun-bleached stone. There's even a backstage, a stretch of reeds behind a curtain made from someone's nicest cloak, and a schedule that no one really follows, but everyone pretends to understand. Dionysus watches all of this unfold while reclining on a woven mat, sipping from a cup that seems to refill itself in suspiciously divine fashion. His feet are in a bowl of cool water, a leopard is using his thigh as a pillow, and he's wearing a mask of his own face purely for irony. But he isn't satisfied yet. The stories are flowing, the masks are spreading, the solo acts are gaining followers, but something about it still feels incomplete. He murmurs to the nearest mortal, a friendly potter named Icaros, who has somehow become the unofficial stage manager. They don't understand the masks yet, not deeply. Icaros blinks. You mean they're using them wrong? No, they're using them perfectly, but they don't fear them, they don't revere them. It's all too casual. We need to add misunderstanding. Because nothing makes mortals take things seriously like confusing the life out of them. So Dionysus decides to up the stakes. The next day, he appears with a new set of masks, each carved from fig wood, lined with lambskin, and painted with exaggerated expressions, joy, sorrow, madness, and someone just stepped on a pine cone. These masks are too good, uncannily lifelike, strangely magnetic. He passes them out one by one, each with a solemn nod and a cryptic phrase like, "Don't look at your own reflection while wearing this," or "Only remove it after 3 fig leaves fall." The villagers, of course, immediately begin to speculate, and so the myths around masks are born. Your mainstream historical fact, Greek theatrical masks were more than props, they were crucial to performance. Crafted from materials like linen, cork, or wood, they amplified emotion and allowed actors to play multiple roles. Some had built-in mouthpieces that acted as rudimentary megaphones, making the actor's voice carry further in open-air theatres. Your quirky tidbit. Some ancient Greeks believed masks could momentarily possess a performer, especially during tragedies. Wearing the mask too long or sleeping in it was thought to cause strange dreams, emotional outbursts, or even divine visions. In other words, ancient method acting had side effects. And for the debate of the day, scholars still argue whether the masks were designed primarily for visibility or spiritual transformation. Some suggest that the exaggerated features were meant to ensure audiences far from the stage could still identify characters, while others believe the masks were sacred objects, tied to ritual and identity loss. Both may be true. Back in the grove, the moment one actor dons the sorrow mask, the air changes, the crowd hushes. The actor begins to speak, but it's not him. His voice deepens, his posture shifts. He stares into the middle distance, as if remembering a lifetime that isn't his. "Is that part of the act?" someone whispers. Dionysus smiles. "It is now." Soon no performance is complete without masks. They become revered objects, kept in carved boxes or hung above hearths like guardian spirits. Actors name them. Audiences bow to them. Children dare each other to wear them at night. And then there's the chorus, remember them? The synchronized storytellers, always a bit out of step and proud of it? Well, they're evolving too. Dionysus decides they need movement. Not just standing in lines and waving arms, they need full-body, stomping, arm-sweeping, rhythm-clapping movement, choreography. He starts them off with something simple: 3 steps forward, 1 step back, spin, chant, dramatic, hand to the chest. They mess it up instantly, but somehow it still looks like art. One member trips and invents the first fall to knees in despair pose. Another loses their staff and improvises a dance around it. The audience is enchanted. Which leads us to your next historical fact. Greek choruses didn't just speak, they danced. Their movements were ritualized, timed to flute music, and deeply symbolic. Entire choreographies were designed to express emotion, signal mood shifts, or accompany poetic meter. And yes, your quirky tidbit, ancient choreographers were so serious about this that in some cities they trained chorus members months in advance. There were dance drills, voice rehearsals, and occasional arguments over whether a head tilt counted as a full gesture or a mere flourish. Here in the grove, the chorus now practices in the mornings with a flute-playing fisherman who's surprisingly good at rhythm. They wear matching sashes, they chant in harmonies, they argue about eye contact, and performances transform again. No longer just stories, they become experiences. A solo actor monologues while the chorus weaves behind them like a river of shadow and light. A comedic scene plays out with background dancers mimicking exaggerated reactions. A tragedy ends with a wordless, swaying song that leaves the audience staring into their wine cups for an uncomfortable amount of time. It is glorious. And Dionysus? He's already imagining more. Larger audiences, better acoustics, cities built with whole hillsides carved into theatres, prizes, rival playwrights, public debates about whether it's too experimental. But for now, he lets the grove do what groves do, grow. He closes his eyes, the wind hums, the goat snorts in its sleep, because now, finally, the mortals understand that theatre isn't just about telling a story, it's about becoming the story, losing yourself in it, and leaving a little piece of yourself behind on stage. By now, performances are so regular that the village actually installs a crude signpost beside the fig tree that reads, "Tonight's tragedy, the lost grape of Delos." It's written in charcoal and misspelled, but it's the thought that counts. You drift quietly beside the gathering crowd as twilight settles in, casting long shadows across the packed earth. There's the smell of roasted onions, fresh olives, and someone's overly ambitious goat cheese experiment. Children dart between ankles, pretending to be tragic heroes. One small boy, swaddled in a bedsheet, wails, "Why must I suffer for my sandals?" And 3 old men tear up. Tonight is different. Tonight the Grove is hosting its first ever full-length play. 3 acts, a prologue, a climax so intense it has its own musical interlude, and a chorus with matching tunics thanks to a travelling fabric merchant with a soft spot for drama. But before the show can begin, there's a hiccup. The lead actor has stage fright. He's wearing the hero mask, standing just behind the curtain, a literal curtain, someone's laundry sheet still slightly damp, and he's frozen, hands shaking, knees knocking, breathing like a panicked flute. Dionysus notices from his usual lounging spot, perched halfway up a fig tree with a cluster of grapes in one hand and a mild smirk in the other. He watches for a moment, then slips down silently and glides backstage. "You okay?" he asks gently. The actor nods too fast. "You look like you're about to give birth to a satyr." A groan. "I can't remember the first line." Dionysus leans in close, eyes twinkling. "Here's the secret. No one knows the first line, not even the gods."
You just say it like it matters. And with that, he gives the actor a little push toward the stage. The man stumbles forward, mask slightly askew, and shouts, "Who has stolen my grape and buried my honor in the dirt?" The audience erupts, clapping, cheering, a single high-pitched woo from the wine corner. And just like that, the actor transforms, the mask fuses to his movements, the fear fades, the lines flow, the story unfolds. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek actors often wore full-face masks with exaggerated expressions to signal their characters' emotions and roles.
Because they often played multiple characters in the same production, the masks were essential for clarity and for sudden on-stage transformations. Your quirky tidbit. These masks were so central to the experience that actors were referred to, not by their names, but by the roles they played. In some records, they're literally called the man who was Agamemnon or the second messenger who died off stage. And the ongoing scholarly debate, was stage fright a known phenomenon in ancient Greece? There's little written about it directly, but given the size of the audiences, sometimes 10,000 or more, it's hard to imagine not getting sweaty palms. Historians suspect performers used ritual chants, breathing exercises, and a little diluted wine to calm their nerves, so not all that different from today's green rooms. Back in the Grove, the play continues. There are betrayals, there are musical interludes, there's a subplot involving a pigeon that may or may not symbolize fate. One chorus member forgets a line and improvises a haunting moan that everyone decides is genius. But what matters most isn't the perfection, it's the connection. At one point in Act 2, the hero stands at center stage, arms wide, and cries out, "What good is wine if there's no one left to share it with?" The line lands hard. People shift, throats tighten. Someone in the back actually whispers, "That's me." You float among them, sensing the air grow thick with recognition, not just of the story, but of themselves in the story. And that, of course, is the point. Dionysus, now back in his tree, watches with a grin so wide it practically glows, because he knows what you now know too. Theatre isn't about fiction. It's about truth disguised in costume, pain in poetry, love in metaphor, laughter, just one mask removed from despair. The final act ends in silence. Not because of a mistake, but because the last scene is wordless. The hero, broken and barefoot, places a single grape on a stone and walks away. The chorus turns, faces the crowd, and bows. No one claps at first. They're too stunned. Then thunder, applause, cheers, stomping feet. Someone throws a laurel wreath. The goat bleats. Dionysus stands, lifts his cup, and nods. "To fear," he says. "To masks," someone replies. "To forgetting your lines and doing it anyway," shouts a tipsy auntie from the third row. And that night, for the first time, the actors gather together after the show, not to rehearse, not to critique, but to talk about how it felt, about the heat of the audience's eyes, about the silence before the laugh. Dionysus lets them speak, because this, too, is part of the ritual, the after, the quiet celebration of shared transformation. And you? You drift there beside them, heart full of borrowed emotions, head heavy with the wine of performance, because once you've seen a story come alive, you're never quite the same again. The next morning begins with a very slow sunrise, almost like the sun itself has stage fright. You drift through the grove as a gentle fog curls between olive trunks. and the still warm embers of last night's bonfire. There's a certain quiet here, the kind that only comes after something truly meaningful, the kind that doesn't rush to fill the silence. People move softly, speaking in half-whispers, as if they're afraid to disturb the lingering echo of last night's final line. Dionysus is already awake. He's barefoot, walking in slow loops around the stage with his hands behind his back like a director who just realized he accidentally created an entire art form. He stops by the grape-stained stone that served as last night's altar prop and says, almost to himself, "I think that was the first real tragedy." Nearby, the potter Ikaros yawns. "You mean the play?" "No," Dionysus says with a sly grin. "I mean the aftertaste. Because it turns out the thing about theatre, the real kind, is that it lingers, it follows you. It unspools its threads long after the masks are off. A good performance doesn't end when the stage empties. It ends when your thoughts stop replaying it." So now Dionysus knows what's next. He's seen the heights of comedy and the depths of tragedy. He's watched the villagers stumble through heartbreak and hysteria, witnessed their catharsis in the form of wild applause and gentle tears. And yet something's still missing. Balance. You can't build a house out of just tears. You need laughter too, the kind that doesn't depend on clever metaphors or long-lost grapes, the kind that hits like a goat to the face. And so today he sets out to invent comedy. Your mainstream historical fact. In classical Athens, comedies were performed alongside tragedies at major festivals like the city Dionysia. While tragedies explored lofty themes of fate, gods, and justice, comedies often tackled everyday life, politics, and bodily functions with gusto. And your quirky tidbit, some of the earliest comedic performances included actors wearing oversized padded costumes, exaggerated fallacies, yes, really, and absurd masks. Nothing was sacred. Not the gods, not the politicians, and certainly not the audience. As for scholarly uncertainty, historians still debate whether comedy or tragedy came first. Aristotle believed tragedy evolved from dithyrambs and comedy from phallic processions. Others argue that laughter was always part of human storytelling. It just took longer to formalize. Either way, once comedy got a seat at the table, it refused to leave. Back in the grove, Dionysus decides to test the waters. He gathers a group of volunteers, half of whom are still drunk from the night before, and hands them masks painted with ridiculous expressions, crossed eyes, giant grins, eyebrows so high they nearly touch the forehead band. Then he sets a single rule: make them laugh. The actors look at each other, shrug, and begin. The first scene is nonsense. A farmer falls into a wine barrel. A goat steals someone's shoe. Someone else plays a confused oracle who can only answer questions by sneezing. It's absurd. It's chaotic. It's hilarious. The audience roars with laughter, the kind that can't be controlled, the kind that wipes away tension like water on a dusty floor. One actor improvises a song about how olives are just grapes that gave up on fun. A child tries to upstage everyone by doing cartwheels across the stage, then dramatically fake fainting. And Dionysus? He laughs so hard he spills his wine, twice. This too becomes ritual. Soon the villagers establish a second night of performance during each festival, one dedicated entirely to comedy. They call it the Night of the Fool, and it's quickly everyone's favorite. Especially because mistakes are encouraged. If a mask falls off, someone yells "part of the show" and bows. In fact, during one particularly wild performance, the chorus accidentally starts their final chant a full 5 minutes early, and instead of stopping, they just keep chanting over the scene until everyone gives up and bows anyway. Cue thunderous applause, and thus improvisation is born. Dionysus begins keeping 2 sets of masks, one for tragedy, one for comedy. The villagers hang them on opposite sides of the fig tree, one solemn and long-faced, one grinning and ridiculous. One day, someone asks him, "Which one do you like more?" He sips his wine, depends on the audience. Because he knows now that comedy and tragedy aren't opposites, they're siblings, close, intertwined. often mistaken for each other from a distance. You laugh until you cry until you laugh. And in the space between those two is where the best stories live. That night, the Grove hosts its first official comedic competition. The prize, a pair of mismatched sandals and a jar of pickled turnips. The winning play features a chicken that thinks it's a lawyer, a chorus that only speaks in animal noises, and an ending where everyone just sits down and eats soup. Dionysus awards them the sandals personally. He even tries one on. "Too small," he says solemnly. "Perfect tragedy." By the time the next moon rises over the Grove, the comedy masks have become just as sacred and just as dangerous as the tragic ones. You drift through the olive-scented dusk, watching villagers sort through a growing collection of props: wooden sausages, goat-tail fans, oversized sandals, a surprisingly realistic rubber fish. Laughter ripples through the crowd even before the performances begin. Something is shifting. The Grove has changed from a sleepy little clearing into a full-blown cultural furnace. People travel for miles to sit beneath its fig trees and watch mortals pretend to be kings, fools, or talking birds. Some bring gifts, wine, song, rumors of other cities doing the same thing. Others bring questions. Is it true you can lose yourself in a role? Do the masks speak when no one's listening? Who writes the stories, and are they listening to the gods? Dionysus, of course, lounges in the centre of it all, surrounded by cushions, cats, half-written scripts, and a growing fan club of travelling playwrights and wandering weirdos. He's beginning to realise something he never expected. He's created a community, not just a festival, not just a stage, but a society orbiting art, a place where it's acceptable, encouraged even, to be loud, to cry in public, to make an entire amphora's worth of people roar with laughter because you slipped on a melon rind and landed in a barrel while screaming about fate. But even Dionysus knows you can't just have masks and wine. You need order, which is ironic considering he's the god of very much the opposite. And so under a full moon, he announces something that makes every goat in a 10-mile radius bray in confusion. Theatre, he proclaims, needs rules. Your mainstream historical fact. By the 5th century BCE, Athens formalized its dramatic festivals. Playwrights submitted works in advance. Judges were selected. Selected. Prizes were awarded, often a tripod or a laurel wreath. It wasn't just performance, it was competition. Art was not only for emotion, it was for honor. And your quirky tidbit? At some festivals, the order of performances was determined by lot. Imagine showing up with your great, tragic masterpiece and finding out you have to follow a comedy about flatulent philosophers. Tough act. As for the scholarly debate, historians still wonder about the role of judges in ancient drama competitions. Were they truly impartial? Were bribes involved? Spoiler, probably. And did the gods care who won, or were they just there for the spectacle? Back in the Grove, Dionysus rolls out the first list of official festival rules. It's painted on a long plank of driftwood and written entirely in grape juice. It reads, "Every performance must tell a new story, unless you improve an old one. Tragedy before comedy, unless the goat disagrees. The chorus must chant together. Trying counts. Props are encouraged. Extra points for food-based ones. No booing unless it's very funny. If a mask falls off, pretend it was divine intervention. All decisions are final, unless Dionysus changes his mind. Wine is not optional. These rules are received with raucous applause. People like having guidelines, especially if they can creatively break them later. Soon, every performance begins with a formal ritual. The lighting of the sacred torch, which is just a stick someone waved near a fire, a collective gulp of wine, and the chant for Dionysus, god of madness. May we forget who we are just long enough to remember something true. Tonight's lineup includes 2 tragedies, a musical interlude by a shepherd with one note on the flute, and a comedy called The Man Who Married a Turnip. It's a hit. You watch the audience erupt in tears at one play, then laughter at the next, then awkward throat-clearing during the musical bit. The emotions are real, raw, and unapologetic. People don't pretend not to feel things here. They lean in, they live bigger. And that's exactly what Dionysus wanted. You see, he didn't invent theatre to distract people. He invented it to unleash them, to give mortals a place where joy could be as grand as grief, where imagination could stand taller than logic, and where even the smallest, most ordinary person could become a character in something bigger than themselves. Tonight, the final play ends with an impromptu dance. A child runs on stage and begins spinning. An old woman joins, then the chorus, then everyone, even the actors, even Dionysus. He doesn't just dance, he becomes the dance, whirling, clapping, laughing, until his crown falls off and his robe flies open. The villagers don't even realize the god is among them. They just think he's a particularly graceful drunk. And maybe that's the point, because in this moment, no one is performing. No one is pretending. They are simply alive. And for Dionysus, that's the real stage. The sun rises slow and golden over the grove the next morning, casting long beams of light through the leaves like stage lights set to gentle spotlight. You drift along the edges of the now well-worn performance space, past footprints in the dust, a single dropped mask half buried near the fig tree, and what appears to be a clay jug labelled "Costume Storage, Do Not Drink Unless Desperate." But today something's different, something in the mood. The laughter has faded, the wine's been sipped, and now the people want depth. They crave stories that don't just entertain but wound, just enough to remind them that even play acting can cut close to the bone. And so tragedy makes its grand return, with a vengeance. Dionysus senses it before anyone else. He's been lounging on a low branch, scribbling potential play titles in the dirt. The Goat of Sorrows. Oedipus, but more crying. That one vase I dropped that day. All promising, but it isn't just a new script they want. They want suffering. So he whispers to a young playwright named Ariston, a quiet man with a thundercloud stare and a voice like burnt honey. Write me a play so sad, Dionysus says, that the audience won't be sure whether to cry or just walk into the sea. And Ariston does. He calls it Ashes of the Vine, and no one is ready. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The most celebrated Greek tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, crafted tales of gods, fate, pride, and downfall that became cornerstones of Western drama. These weren't just stories, they were meditations on justice, grief, and what it means to be human. A quirky tidbit? Euripides was known for writing moody characters, complex, unpredictable, and very, dramatic. Some of his protagonists stared off cliffs for whole monologues, and audiences loved it. He was the patron playwright of what we'd now call theatre kids. The scholarly debate here is a juicy one. Some historians argue that tragedy functioned as civic therapy, a way for citizens to collectively process trauma, especially during wartime. Others suggest it was more about status and philosophy. Regardless, few dispute that the Greeks took their sadness seriously. Back in the grove, the evening fog rolls in thick and silver. The crowd gathers silently. No wine sloshing, no loud jokes, just stillness, expectation. The chorus walks on stage slowly, draped in dark cloth, faces hidden behind masks of hollow eyes and soft frowns. They do not speak. They breathe in eerie unison, like wind through a cave. Then Ariston's play begins. The plot is simple. A vineyard owner loses his land, his love, his name, and, in the final act, his memory. He wanders the stage, asking each person in the crowd if they know who he is. When they don't answer, he collapses. You watch the audience melt. One man wipes tears with a sleeve and says, "I don't even like grapes." A woman clutches her friend's hand so tightly they both lose circulation. Even the goat seems solemn, chewing grass with a contemplative air. Halfway through, the chorus begins softly humming, a wordless, droning lament that seems to grow heavier with every breath. And then comes the ending. No redemption, no twist, Just the protagonist sitting, broken, holding a single grape between his fingers, whispering, "Will it remember me?" Silence. Then thunderous, stunned applause. But it's not joy, it's recognition. Dionysus, watching from the shadows, exhales slowly. This is what he meant when he first dreamt of theatre. Not just masks and laughter, but the mirror, the ache, the shared moment when a group of strangers forget they're watching actors and remember they're human. That night, he joins the actors around a quiet fire. No revelry, no dancing, just stories, confessions. One actor speaks about her brother lost at sea, another whispers of the first time he cried in front of his father, and how the man hugged him so hard he thought his ribs would break. And Dionysus? He listens, because even a god needs reminding sometimes. Pain, when told right, becomes a gift. The next morning, no one performs. Instead, they sit in the grove, retelling the lines that struck them deepest. One child recites the great monologue in full, voice trembling. Someone hangs a new mask on the fig tree. White, blank, tear-streaked. From that day forward, Ashes of the Vine becomes sacred text. It's only performed once a year, only by moonlight, only if someone has truly known grief. And that's the thing about tragedy. It demands earnestness. You can fake joy, you can mock fear, but sorrow knows. Dionysus smiles to himself as he walks through the grove alone that afternoon. He kneels to pick up the script Ariston left behind.
It's already smudged, already faded, and still he reads every word. Good, he says softly. Let them feel it, let them all feel it. Because in the theatre he's built, not with bricks, but with belief. Every emotion has a home, even the ones that hurt. The day after Ashes of the Vine, the grove is quieter than usual. Not silent, no grove touched by Dionysus is ever truly silent, but subdued, thoughtful. You drift through it slowly, as if the trees themselves are holding their breath, waiting to see what comes next, because what comes after a tragedy so powerful that it leaves the audience blinking at the moon, unsure of their own names. Naturally, a baker throws a pie. The comedy troupe, led by a tall, barefoot woman named Clea, who swears she once made Apollo laugh by juggling figs, decides it's time to reset the energy. Their plan, a farce called The Goose, that shouted murder, starring a man in a feathered tunic, a chorus of overly dramatic vegetables, and a pie that, by all accounts, was never meant to be airborne. And so the theatre breathes again. But now, something is different. The crowd laughs, yes, but not just out of delight. They laugh because they need to, because after dipping so deeply into sorrow the night before, their laughter tonight has weight. Context. It isn't just silly, it's healing. Dionysus watches it all unfold from his perch beneath the fig tree, a half-eaten olive between his fingers, and murmurs, "Perfect." He knows the pattern now. This is the rhythm he's been searching for since the very first drunken monologue to a shepherd. Tragedy pulls you under, comedy lifts you out, and somewhere between the two, theatre lives. Your mainstream historical fact. In formal Athenian festivals, playwrights didn't just write one play, they wrote 3 tragedies and a final satyr play. This comic relief at the end was essential, a way to bring the audience back from the emotional cliff they'd just hurled themselves off. Greeks understood the value of catharsis followed by comic release. A quirky tidbit. Satyr plays often featured absurd plots, half-naked characters with horsetails and jokes about bodily functions. They were chaotic borderline offense, a line offensive and deeply beloved. Basically, the original after party, the ongoing scholarly debate. Some researchers argue that satyr plays were more than comic relief. They were an essential reminder of the balance between human suffering and divine absurdity. Others believe they simply kept the audiences from rioting out of sheer despair. Either way, their existence proves one thing. Even the Greeks couldn't stay serious for too long. Back in the grove, Clear's comedy is in full swing. The goose honks dramatically every time someone lies. The vegetables chant in iambic pentameter. The pie, intended to be symbolic,
ends up on the face of a sleeping noble in the second row, who wakes up thinking it's divine punishment for snoring, and the crowd howls. Even the people still emotionally hungover from Ariston's tragedy can't help themselves. Tears turn to giggles, groans to belly laughs. One woman actually falls out of her seat and shouts, I feel alive again. Dionysus grins, because he gets it now. Theatre isn't just a gift, it's a cycle, a living thing. You don't just feed it ideas, you feed it feeling, joy, sorrow, surprise, absurdity. You build it from extremes and contradictions, and somewhere in the middle, mortals find meaning. He's so delighted, in fact, that he invents a new tradition on the spot, the echo bowl. After each performance, a clay bowl is passed around. Audience members drop in tokens, pebbles, fig leaves, bits of ribbon, representing how the play made them feel. Red for anger, blue for sorrow, yellow for joy, green for... I have no idea what I just watched, but I feel different now. That night, after the goose has taken its final bow, and the vegetables have stage-dived into the chorus pit, the bowl is full, mostly green, which Dionysus considers the win. Later, as the fire crackles low and the masks are hung on hooks made from twisted fig branches, a few actors stay behind. They ask Dionysus a question that no one has asked him directly before. Why are you doing this? He pauses, looks at the stars, and says, because you mortals spend so much time pretending not to feel things. I just wanted to give you a reason to stop pretending. They sit with that. And so do you, because it's not just about the plays. It never was. It's about the permission. The stage isn't just a platform, it's a portal. Step onto it and you become someone else. Watch from the seats and you remember who you are. That's the magic. That's the madness, and that's the gift of a bored god who could have stayed on Olympus throwing grapes at Apollo, but instead decided to invent something that would outlast temples, a story that never truly ends. The next morning, there's a soft drizzle falling over the grove. Not a storm, just the kind of quiet, misty rain that makes the olives shine and the goats a little moodier than usual. You drift beneath the trees as villagers bustle under awnings and fig-leaf canopies, arguing over whether it's too wet to rehearse or if the weather is just adding natural ambience. Dionysus, he is unbothered. He's perched cross-legged on a damp boulder, sipping tea from a wine cup just to confuse people while supervising today's rehearsal for something new. Because you see, after tragedy and comedy and pies to the face, the Grove has begun craving something even stranger, something in between. Not just stories about life or against life, but next to it, something absurd, impulsive, slightly inappropriate, and more than a little chaotic. In short, satyr plays. He's been sitting on this idea for a while. Half-goat, half-human troublemakers who drink too much, dance too hard, and interrupt every serious moment with innuendo and hooting. It's very on brand. The chorus, of course, is sceptical. So, we wear what exactly? Dionysus gestures to a pile of furs, tails, masks with wild eyes and enormous grins. These! You'll prance, you'll jeer, you'll pretend to be startled by thunder and seduce tree stumps. Silence. Then one chorus member tries on a goat tail and bursts out laughing. And that's how the first satyr play begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Satyr plays were an essential part of Greek festivals. Performed after the three major tragedies, they were bawdy, fast-paced, and filled with slapstick. The chorus dressed as satyrs, followers of Dionysus, complete with tails and horse-like features. The point? Comic relief, pure and simple. Your quirky tidbit? Some satyr plays parodied the very tragedies they followed. Imagine a version of Oedipus Rex, where Oedipus is constantly interrupted by dancing satyrs asking deeply inappropriate questions. Greeks weren't afraid to mock their own myths, and audiences loved it. And the scholarly debate? There's very little surviving text from satyr plays, so scholars still argue about how wild they actually got. Some believe they were just playful, others think they bordered on absolute chaos, with songs, dancing, crude jokes, and constant meta-commentary. If you've ever been to a midnight improv show, you're in the right mental space. Back in the grove, Dionysus claps his hands and the first scene begins. The plot? Something about a lost wine jug, a singing donkey, and an oracle with hiccups. It makes no sense. Doesn't have to. The actors wear furry trousers and stumble over each other, bleating with joy and slapping each other with reeds. At one point, two satyrs wrestle over a stolen fig, while the chorus chants, "Fig, fig, fig," in increasing tempo. And the audience, delighted, especially the older folks who claim it reminds them of how festivals used to be before everything got so intellectual. A child watching from a tree branch falls off from laughing. The village priest sighs deeply but doesn't leave. Even the goats seem oddly entertained. But amid all this nonsense, something real is happening. The actors are looser, braver. They try things they wouldn't try in a tragedy. They make eye contact with the audience. They play, and the audience plays back. They shout suggestions. They laugh out of turn. One man hands a satyr a piece of cheese mid-scene, and the actor makes it a plot point. Suddenly the fourth wall is gone, and Dionysus realizes this is the final ingredient. You see, while tragedy and comedy are meant to pull you in, satyr plays let you join. You're not just a witness, you're a co-conspirator. The satyrs wink, they whisper, they break character on purpose, and then pretend it was scripted all along. It's performance as invitation. And here comes your scholarly footnote for the night. Some modern academics propose that satyr plays help teach audiences how to watch theatre. After the emotional intensity of tragedy and the sharp wit of comedy, satyr plays reminded people not to take anything, including the gods, too seriously. Back in the grove, the play ends with a song about a wine jug that found love, followed by a chorus line of prancing satyrs and one very reluctant goose. Thunderous applause, and Dionysus, grinning from ear to ear, raises his cup and shouts, "Now that's a performance." That night, over fig cakes and spiced wine, the villagers agree to officially add a third night to every festival. One for sorrow, one for laughter, and one for sheer, unhinged joy. They call it the Night of the Tales. It becomes the people's favourite. A night when nothing is sacred and everything is celebrated. And as you drift gently through the warm dusk, you realize this is the point. Not just the invention of theatre, but the completion of it. Tragedy for feeling, comedy for releasing, satyrs for remembering that life at its core is absurd. 3 nights, 3 moods, 1 god, and Dionysus. He reclines under the fig tree, tail swaying, wine sloshing, utterly content. The theatre is whole now. Tonight the grove glows, not just from torches or fireflies or the reflection of moonlight on wine jars, but from something warmer, something earned. The kind of glow a place gets when it knows it's become more than it ever meant to be. You float above it gently, the earth pulsing with song, the fig trees rustling like old stage curtains. It's the final night of this season's festival. The trilogy has unfolded tragedy, comedy, and the madness of the satyrs. The villagers have cried until their cheeks burned, laughed until their ribs ached, and danced in fur trousers until their legs gave out. They're tired in the best way. And Dionysus, he's proud, but also itching again, because now he wants to make it bigger. He walks through the grove barefoot, trailing fingers across masks hung from tree limbs like fruit. He stops near the chorus, who are lounging with their feet in a wine bucket, and says, "I want a city to do this. I want hills echoing with odes. I want staircases filled with poems. I want a stadium of sorrow, followed by a tsunami of laughter." The chorus respond with a synchronized shrug. "Okay, what do you want us to wear?" And so the idea of a formal amphitheater begins to take shape. Your mainstream historical fact. By the late 6th century BCE, Athens constructed the Theatre of Dionysus, a monumental open-air structure carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis. It held thousands of people and became the beating heart of Greek drama. Most of the world's oldest surviving plays were performed there first. Your quirky tidbit? Early audience members brought cushions, or failing that, sat on their cloaks. Some even brought snacks, gossip, and occasionally unruly pets. One critic reportedly stormed out of a tragedy because he thought the chorus was too whiny. The scholarly debate: did the architecture influence the content, or the other way around? Some argue that the sweeping acoustics and vast audience capacity shaped how plays were written, with louder voices, bigger gestures, and more dramatic entrances. Others believe the stories came first, and the architecture followed. Back in the grove, Dionysus begins making plans. He draws shapes in the dirt, half circles, tears. It must rise, he says, like emotion. Let the chorus speak from below and the gods descend from the sky. He assigns roles. The stonecutter becomes a set designer. The goat herder becomes a sound tester. A child is put in charge of audience etiquette, which mostly means yelling shh at anyone unwrapping olives during a monologue. Construction begins with what tools they have: baskets, vines, patience, and an overwhelming amount of ambition. Slowly, day by day, they shape the slope of the hill beside the grove into a curved bowl, seating arranged like sun rays fanning out from the stage. And one evening, as the first stones settle into place, a traveller arrives. He wears scholar's robes, dusty sandals, and a look of suspicious curiosity. His name is Parnes, and he's from Athens. "I've heard rumours," he says cautiously, "of a grove where theatre is born between vines and madness. I thought it was a metaphor." Dionysus offers him a mask and a cup of wine. It's both. Parnes watches a performance, a one-act comedy involving a ghost who can't stop haunting the wrong house, and by the end he's on his feet shouting, "This must come to Athens." Dionysus winks. That's the plan. Soon more visitors arrive: philosophers, poets, politicians who pretend to be unimpressed but secretly take notes. A sculptor sketches the grove in the margins of his notebooks. A flute player composes a piece called Ode to the Fig Tree That Saw Too Much. And just like that, the myth begins to travel. They don't call it theatre yet, they call it the Dionysia. And back in the grove, rehearsals continue. Tonight's show is a strange one. A blend of tragedy and comedy called The Fisherman's Wife and The Talking Tuna. The chorus is confused, the script is weepy and ridiculous. No one knows when to laugh or cry, and that's when Dionysus realizes this is the next frontier. Blending genres, he watches as the actors waver between tones, between emotion and absurdity, between a tearful goodbye and a joke about pickled eels. And the audience, they don't know what to feel. So they feel everything. Some people sob through the funny parts, others laugh through the sad ones. One person says, "I didn't understand a word of it, but I feel like I've been kissed by a thunderstorm." And Dionysus leans back, arms folded behind his head, and says, "Perfect." Because real stories don't follow rules. They spiral, they stagger, they surprise. And so in the final night of the final festival, in this original grove, the villagers perform a story without genre, a tale without boundaries, a piece of chaos stitched together with rhythm and risk, and the people love it. They don't know what just happened, but they know they'll never forget it. Dawn arrives not with trumpets but with yawns. The grove is quiet again, the kind of quiet that follows something huge and beautiful and done. You drift slowly through the now hollowed seating ring, where sandals lie forgotten, and the echo of last night's strange, wonderful, undefinable play still clings to the stones like perfume. Dionysus, unsurprisingly, is already awake. He's seated atop the stone stage, legs dangling like a child's, nibbling at a fig and staring off into the distant hills. But he's not smiling, not frowning either, just thinking. Because now that the grove has found its rhythm, tragedy, comedy, satyrs, chaos, he knows the next step is not here. It's out there. He mutters aloud, "If a performance moves only one village, it's a play."
But if it moves the world, he doesn't finish the thought. Instead, he stands. He lifts his thyrsus staff, a vine-twined sceptre tipped with a pine cone, equal parts walking stick and mischief magnet, and calls to the grove's sleepy population, "Pack your props, clean your masks, the grove is no longer the stage." They blink. Then what is? Dionysus grins. the world? Your mainstream historical fact: theatre in ancient Greece did eventually spread beyond Athens and Attica, with travelling troupes performing across the Mediterranean. Even the Romans, centuries later, borrowed heavily from Greek dramatic forms, often translating or outright stealing entire works. Your quirky tidbit? Some actors became so well known that they were followed from city to city by fans.
They were the rock stars of their day, signing scraps of papyrus and performing monologues to adoring crowds in dusty courtyards and marble colonnades alike. And as for the scholarly debate, historians still question how structured these travelling performances were. Were they official? Did they require state approval? Or were they simply ambitious troupes of storytellers chasing wine and applause? Probably all of the above. Back in the grove, the packing is chaotic. The chorus insists on taking the entire curtain pole. The satyrs attempt to bring a live goat as a travelling inspiration. Clear, the leader of the comedy troupe, is stuffing banana peels and turnip masks into a wine jug labelled "Don't open until Delphi." Dionysus doesn't plan the route. Of course he doesn't. He just starts walking. The road is uneven, dusty, winding between vineyards and forgotten shrines. But every step feels like something beginning again. The troupe follows him: actors, singers, carpenters, chorus members, prop makers, a child dressed as a cloud. And behind them, the goat, as always, plods along like it's seen the future and finds it amusing. Their first stop is a hillside village too small for a temple, but just large enough to have opinions. Dionysus walks in with no fanfare, no miracles, just a stage built from crates, a flute player warming up, and a chorus that still doesn't agree on their first note. But when the villagers see them, they gather, at first with arms crossed, skeptical, then slowly with curiosity. By the time the lead actor has declared, "This day I am not myself. I am a king with no kingdom and a toenail curse," the villagers are hooked. Laughter, gasps, murmured lines repeated in awe. By the end of the show, a woman presses a silver earring into Dionysus's hand and says, "That was better than prophecy." And just like that, the troupe becomes a legend. They wander from town to town, leaving stories in their wake like fallen fig leaves. Not just tales of gods or mortals, but plays about them. The locals, their worries, their hopes, their sacred goats. They adapt, improvise, steal jokes from one village and repurpose them in the next. Soon they're invited to perform in Delphi, then Corinth, then Athens. And that is where everything changes, because Athens isn't a village, it's an idea. It's scholars and statues, politics and power, temples so white they hurt your eyes. It's full of people who have seen things, real theatre by real writers, with real judges and real rules, and they're not expecting a barefoot god and a goat. But Dionysus doesn't flinch. He stands in the centre of the Athenian square, raises his hands and says, "We bring you truth in a mask, chaos in rhyme, and at least one vegetable-related misunderstanding." A hush, then laughter, then curiosity. Soon they're building him an amphitheater. They name the festival after him, the city Dionysia. And everything that started under a fig tree now climbs the marble steps of civilization. They formalize the contest, list the names of playwrights, assign judges, build prize podiums, introduce audience seating by tribe. Dionysus allows it, with one condition: the wine must still flow. Your mainstream historical fact: the city Dionysia became the most prestigious dramatic festival in Athens, drawing in playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Winning the competition wasn't just an artistic triumph, it was political glory. Your quirky tidbit? Some audience members brought snacks, shade umbrellas, or even note scrolls to review the plays. There was intermission gossip. People booed. People fainted. It was basically a red carpet event without the carpet. And now the debate: did Dionysus invent theatre because he wanted mortals to grow, or because he wanted to watch them try? Back in Athens, the festival is in full swing. 3 days of tragedy, one of comedy, one of Satan nonsense that ends in a chorus member accidentally setting their tail on fire. And Dionysus? He reclines in the official god seat built into the front row, goblet in hand, surrounded by laurel wreaths and playwrights who mutter anxiously into their scrolls. He watches it all with a slow smile, because he knows this isn't the end of his boredom, but it is the end of silence. By the second year of the city Dionysia, the theatre in Athens doesn't just feel like a festival anymore, it feels like a season. You drift through the marble amphitheatre as early morning sunlight filters down in warm beams, catching dust motes in mid-air and warming the polished stone seats that now hold thousands of spectators. Some have come from distant cities, others have never missed a year. Everyone, no matter how new or seasoned, holds their breath the same way before the first line is spoken. The plays now begin at dawn and stretch through the day like a divine heartbeat. Thump, thump, silence, gasp, laugh, weep, thump again. The streets hum with anticipation long before the actors even set foot on stage, and somewhere, reclining just so in his carved marble seat, is Dionysus. A wreath of ivy crowns his curls, his robe is too loosely tied, his cup is bottomless.
And his grin, that hasn't changed a bit. But something else has, you see. The mortals have begun to argue, and not about whether theatre is good. That ship has long since sailed. Now they argue about what it means. Is tragedy more noble than comedy? Is a play still sacred if it makes you laugh at the gods? Should masks always conceal,
or can they sometimes reveal? Dionysus watches these arguments with great interest, because for him this is the final proof that theatre has taken root. The moment when people start debating it like it's real life. Your mainstream historical fact. By the 5th century BCE, Greek theatre wasn't just entertainment, it was a civic institution. Citizens attended not just to watch, but to think, to be challenged. The themes of the plays often mirrored real-life tensions: war, justice, family loyalty, moral failure, and the fragile nature of democracy. Your quirky tidbit? Athenian audiences were not passive. They shouted, they hissed, they laughed too early, they sometimes threw things, grapes, shoes, one time a fish. Playwrights developed reputations not just for their style, but for how rowdy or loyal their fans were. And for the scholarly debate, some argue that Greek drama functioned as an early form of public discourse, a way to explore political and philosophical questions together in real time. Others say it was more emotional than rational, but even the rationalists admit that catharsis wasn't just a side effect, it was the goal. Today's tragedy is one of those messy ones, not a clean arc, not a noble downfall. No, today's play is about two brothers at war over inheritance, but also over identity. The kind of story that makes the audience shift in their seats and murmur afterward, "I think he meant for us to feel uncomfortable." And Dionysus loves it. Because this is the theatre at its most powerful, not telling people what to think, but pulling them into the place before thought happens. Into the raw, emotional underworld where you are still deciding what it all means, but not everyone is pleased. Later that evening, under the colonnade, Dionysus overhears two philosophers arguing. One is frowning into his wine. "It's too raw," he says. "Too many feelings. It distracts from clarity." The other shrugs. Maybe clarity was never the point. This sparks something. Dionysus begins encouraging experimentation. He tells one playwright, "Try a silent scene." He tells another, "Add a character who refuses to speak." He challenges a chorus. He "Don't tell the audience what to feel, let them guess." Suddenly new forms blossom. A play is performed backward, from death to birth. Another tells the story of a single event from three perspectives, none of which agree. One ambitious writer tries to compose a two-word tragedy. It bombs, but they try again the next year with 3 words and win. The city Dionysia becomes not just a festival, but a laboratory of emotion. And as the stage evolves, so does the audience. They begin writing reviews, carving lines from their favourite plays into pottery and walls. Some create fan masks painted with the faces of iconic characters. A few even begin dressing as those characters in public, quoting their lines at the market. One fishmonger yells, "Buy these anchovies or suffer like Orestes," and somehow triples her sales. Even outside of the theatre, the city is pulsing with drama now. Because here's the secret. Once people learn to feel deeply in character, they don't stop when the curtain falls. And that's the real revolution. Theatre teaches them how to be more expressive, more empathetic, more willing to admit, yes, I wept at the story of a man and his cursed sandals, and I'd do it again. Dionysus sits on a rooftop that night, overlooking the city bathed in torchlight and humming with recitations and reenactments. He raises his cup. "To feelings," he says. A satyr beside him belches in agreement, and far below, in a crowded street, a group of children recite a scene from the day's play, one pretending to die, another pretending to grieve, all of them too young to understand the story, but already wet,
learning how to carry it. Because theatre never stays on the stage. It lives wherever there's breath and imagination, and thanks to one god's boredom, now it lives everywhere. The city keeps growing, not just in buildings, not just in people, but in stories. You drift now through the narrow marble alleyways of Athens, past shopfronts scrawled with chalk quotes from last week's comedies, past a pottery stand selling limited edition tragedy faces, amphorae. Theatre has seeped into every corner of life. You can't buy olives without hearing an argument about character motivation. You can't visit a bathhouse without overhearing a dramatic reading of someone's favourite monologue from Act 2. And Dionysus? He strolls through it all wearing a cloak made of fig leaves and dramatic sighs. He's pleased, but he's watching closely.
Because theatre, like wine, has a tendency to ferment too long if left unchecked. And something is happening. People are beginning to care more about the competition than the content. Playwrights are becoming celebrities. Critics are becoming feared. Actors are being hired not because they feel the role, but because they can make audiences cheer. The rules, once playful, are growing stricter, formal, rigid. Dionysus frowns, which is rare, because what started as ecstatic chaos in a grove under fig trees is becoming, well, professional. So naturally he decides to disrupt it. He does it the only way he knows how, by sending a woman on stage, not in the chorus, not sneaking into the crowd in a false beard, but centre stage with a mask, a voice and a full script. It causes a scandal. Women, after all, are supposed to stay behind the mask, not wear it, but Dionysus insists. If men can play queens, he says, then queens can play gods. And just like that, a seam splits down the middle of tradition. Your mainstream historical fact. In classical Athens, all actors were male. Even female roles were played by men in masks. It wasn't just custom, it was law. Women were rarely involved in public performance, though they could attend plays, sometimes with restrictions. The question of their presence on stage was never even considered, until it was. Your quirky tidbit. In some rural festivals, especially those outside the Athenian spotlight, there is evidence that women participated in ritual performances and ecstatic dances, particularly in Dionysian cult ceremonies. Some even played leading roles in myth enactments. It's one of those officially not allowed, unofficially happening anyway situations. And your scholarly debate. Were these performances subversive acts of feminist power or just tolerated exceptions to the rule? Some historians argue that women's participation in ritual theatre was far more common than records suggest, just hidden behind veils of myth and modesty. Back in Athens, the reaction is explosive. Some call it sacrilege, others call it thrilling. The audience is torn between awe and outrage. But when the play begins, the crowd falls silent, because she's good, too good. The moment she speaks, clear, calm, commanding, the entire city forgets the rules. They forget the never and the not allowed. They hear only the truth in her voice, the crack in her tone when her character's son dies, the fire when she defies the gods, the softness in her final lines. And when the chorus chants, who speaks with the voice of grief? No one answers, because they all know it's her. Afterward, there are no riots, just questions, murmurs, reconsiderations. Some traditionalists are furious, others quietly admit, she made me feel something I hadn't felt since the first time I saw a mask. And Dionysus? He just sips his wine and says, "Good, let them argue." Because art without friction isn't theatre, it's tourism. The next year, more women asked to perform, not just in lead roles, but in writing, in chorus choreography, in backstage design. They bring new rhythms, new stories, new themes, plays about motherhood, about aging, about watching the world from the sidelines for too long. And they don't just perform, they challenge. One woman writes a play about the wives of heroes waiting endlessly at home, slowly realizing the myths weren't written for them. The audience, half of whom are wives of soldiers, sits stunned. A line from that play becomes famous across the city. "If we must be the quiet in your story, let it be the kind that echoes after you're gone." It's painted on doors, carved into the base of a statue, quoted at dinner tables. And so once again, Dionysus watches as theatre mutates, not in spite of scandal, but because of it. Because the real heart of the thing isn't the stage or the scripts or the competition, it's the way the stories move, from grove to city, from actor to audience, from one kind of voice to another, and from there to everyone. Tonight, after the final play of the season, the amphitheater is quiet. The crowd has gone home. The wine jugs are empty. The masks are hung in careful rows along the backstage wall, each one still humming with the echo of their wearer's emotions. And Dionysus walks through them alone. He touches each one gently. One mask makes him laugh, another makes him sigh, and at the very end of the row is a mask he doesn't recognize. It's simple, unpainted, soft. A woman's face, calm and strong, with eyes that seem to ask a question you can't quite answer. He picks it up, smiles, and whispers, "Well done." Because theatre, like a vine, keeps growing, no matter who plants it. The seasons begin to blur. You drift now, not through one moment, but through the rhythm of years, each new festival folding into the next like parchment in a well-worn script. Athens thrives. Theatres bloom in cities far beyond. And everywhere people gather beneath stone arches, beside dusty roads, in candlelit courtyards, to watch one another feel. The city Dionysia is no longer just an event. It's a calendar anchor, a civic pulse. Children are born during performances. Couples meet during intermissions. Philosophers quote satyr plays and debates, and senators debate, nators debate which mask they feel like today. And yet, with every crescendo there comes a quiet shadow. Fame. Dionysus watches as certain playwrights rise higher than others. Statues are erected, plays are memorized line for line, then performed so often they begin to lose their edge. The crowd begins to chant along, then yawn, then drift. Art, it seems, is beginning to repeat itself. He leans against a column during yet another revival of the Goat of Morning, swirling his wine and muttering, "When the chorus starts before the flute, something's off." He's not wrong. The festival is becoming predictable. The spontaneity of the grove, the wild risk of failure, the desperate, heart-pounding truth of newness, it's fading. And so Dionysus hatches a plan, a terrible, wonderful, chaotic plan. He calls for a play with no ending. The playwrights laugh at first. That's not how stories work. Dionysus shrugs. Exactly. He commissions a script. It's messy, introspective. Loops back on itself. Characters leave, then return wearing masks they already discarded. One act features a man who realizes he is being watched, not by gods, but by people, by an audience, so there's no catharsis, no moral, just questions. And when it's finally performed, the crowd loses their minds. Some boo, some cry, some stare at the sky as if a secret has just cracked open above them. One man leaves halfway through, muttering, "This was either genius or heresy, and I need a fig to process it." And Dionysus, he applauds wildly, alone, because this is what he'd nearly forgotten. That the purpose of theatre isn't comfort, it's provocation, your mainstream historical fact. Greek drama wasn't always about answers. Many plays ended ambiguously, challenging the audience to interpret the events on their own. Some of Euripides' works especially break convention. His Medea ends with the title character escaping on a chariot pulled by dragons, leaving horror unresolved. Your quirky tidbit? Sometimes playwrights made up myths just to surprise the audience. They'd take familiar characters and invent new endings, what we'd now call fan fiction with a budget. Audiences would gasp, argue, sometimes even shout, "That's not what happened," from the front rows. And the scholarly debate, was ambiguity in theatre a bug or a feature? Some argue it was a side effect of rushed writing or incomplete texts. Others believe it was intentional, an invitation to audiences to wrestle with complexity. In a culture of rhetoric and philosophy, the theatre became not just a mirror, but a maze. Back in the city, the controversial play gets whispered about in alleys, debated in bathhouses, reenacted awkwardly in bakeries with stale bread and bad accents. And slowly, theatre begins to evolve again. Some plays now end mid-sentence, some begin with the final line and work backwards. A chorus decides to disagree with the protagonist out loud. One performance invites the audience to vote on the ending with coloured pebbles. A new genre is born, meta-theatre, and Dionysus, watching from his rooftop with a fig in one hand and a goat snoring at his feet, feels something familiar. Joy, not because the theatre is perfect, but because it's alive again. The audience no longer arrives expecting to be told a story. They arrive hoping to be challenged by one. They dress up and they come in character. One man shows up as a chorus of three and changes voices mid-sentence. And the actors, they begin slipping out of their roles in the middle of scenes, speaking as themselves, apologizing to the audience, asking questions like, "Would you forgive me if I were real?" The boundaries dissolve, the masks loosen. And for Dionysus, this is the most delicious chaos of all. He returns to the stage himself, once, just for fun. Disguised as an old man in a too-big mask, he performs a monologue about regret and fermentation. The crowd loves it. Someone says, "He's got real presence." Another says, "He made me cry about raisins." No one recognizes him. And he doesn't mind because it was never about recognition. It was about letting them shine, about giving mortals the tools to become gods for a moment, to put on pain and joy and comedy like cloaks and say, "Look at me, I am your fears, your flaws, your futures." And if they could say it loudly enough, with enough feeling, they might just be transformed. The year the weather turns colder than usual, the theatre doesn't close. It adapts. You drift now through a strangely hushed Athens. There's frost on the temple steps. The olive trees have dropped their leaves early, and even the chorus rehearsals are quieter, more breath than voice. But the stage, it remains, blanketed in fresh straw, lanterns hung from ropes instead of torches. The actors wear thicker cloaks, the masks rimmed in wool, because the stories must go on, even when breath turns to mist, even when no one feels quite like laughing. And this, Dionysus knows, is the true test, not of theatre's power, but of its necessity. You see, anyone can perform when skies are blue, when grapes are ripe and the crowd is already halfway drunk. But when the winds bite, when spirits sag, when the city feels stretched and strange, then is when the stage must rise. He walks quietly through the half-frozen market one morning, listening. No jokes, no arguments about masks, no children reciting monologues to chickens, just silence. So that evening, he gathers the troupe. He doesn't give a speech, he doesn't clap or shout or stir the wine. He just looks at them and says, "Tonight, we perform something soft." They nod. And the performance that follows, it's not grand, it doesn't crack open the heavens or plunge into tragedy. It's not even terribly dramatic, it's just tender. A simple story about a man who loses his way in a snowstorm and is guided home by voices he thought he'd forgotten. The chorus sings quietly. The masks are gentle. The fire is low. The audience holds their cloaks tight and leans in. Not because they can't hear, but because they're afraid to miss even one syllable. And when it ends, no one claps, they just sit. Because something in the stillness has shifted. Dionysus watches, heart full, and thinks, this is theatre at its most dangerous and its most sacred, your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek performances were held outdoors, seasonally, and subject to weather. But in times of hardship, plague, famine, war, theatre was sometimes one of the last rituals to be suspended. It was seen as essential, not optional. A city without drama was a city without soul. Your quirky tidbit? During particularly cold festivals, audiences were known to huddle together under communal cloaks. Vendors sold hot mulled wine outside the theatre gates, and some chorus members would line their sandals with sheep wool. And your scholarly debate, did Greek theatre serve as a form of spiritual medicine? Some argue that especially during difficult years, it operated like communal therapy. Others maintain it was still primarily entertainment. The truth, as always, likely sits in the space between. Back at the fire, the troupe passes around warm bread and leftover festival figs. Someone says, "That might be the quietest audience we've ever had." Someone else replies, "But I felt them the whole time." And Dionysus nods, because feeling was always the goal, not clapping, not trophies.
Not even comprehension, just that moment, the one you feel in your ribs, in your throat, in your pulse, when you know you're not alone. That night, a man walks up to the actors as they're packing away masks. He doesn't say thank you, he says, "I remembered something I thought I'd forgotten." And he walks away. No name, no explanation, but the actors smile, because that's the magic, isn't it? Sometimes theatre doesn't teach.
It returns. A memory, a sorrow, a voice you once silenced. And in those cold, soft seasons when everything else feels lost, a single whispered line under a fig tree or between marble columns can bring you back. Over the next weeks, more soft plays are performed. No endings, no answers, just comfort. Plays about sitting together quietly in the dark. Plays where the hero doesn't fight but listens. Plays where the chorus only hums. And the city begins to shift again. The critics stop rating the performances. The audiences stop booing the experimental bits. Instead, they watch, they breathe, and afterward they leave slower. Sometimes they cry on the steps. Sometimes they hug strangers. Sometimes they go home and say nothing at all, but sleep better than they have in months. And Dionysus, watching it all from the shadows of the colonnade, smiles into his cloak and thinks, yes, let it be gentle. Because theatre is not only a fire. It's also ember, not only thunder, but the space between the storm and the stillness. And as the last snow falls on Athens that winter, covering masks and sandals and scripts forgotten beside the stage, one child runs, laughing across the theatre's wide stone floor, barefoot, joy crackling behind him like music. And Dionysus whispers, "Let the next act begin." By spring, the laughter returns, not in a roar, but in trickles. You drift again through a blooming Athens where the fig trees are thick with fruit and the air hums with that peculiar energy that only comes after a long, quiet grief. The masks are being dusted off. The amphitheaters' stones are warm again. And this time, the people don't just want to feel, they want to celebrate. And so the Festival of Masks is born. It doesn't replace the city Dionysia, it erupts beside it. Less organized, more chaotic, entirely unsanctioned. No judges, no prizes, no programs, just masks and wine and whatever happens next. Dionysus doesn't even announce it. He simply appears one afternoon wearing 7 masks stacked atop one another, and a robe made entirely of theatre programs from previous years. He climbs onto a crate, tosses a fig to the crowd and declares, "Anyone with a mask and a story, you're on next." And somehow that's all it takes. A butcher performs a romantic soliloquy to his cleaver. A child reenacts every satyr play ever written in under 3 minutes, backwards. 2 sisters act out a thunderstorm using only spoons, cloaks, and dramatic coughing. It's nonsense, beautiful nonsense, and it ignites the city. Your mainstream historical fact. Not all Greek performances were part of formal festivals. Many cities hosted smaller local events, some honouring Dionysus, others simply for fun. These rural Dionysia were more spontaneous, with parades, informal plays, and even improvisation. It was theatre unplugged. Your quirky tidbit? In some travelling festivals, performers wore multiple masks around their necks and switched characters mid-scene without missing a beat. One actor reportedly played 7 characters in a single tragedy until his chorus revolted and tied his sandals together mid-performance. And the debate, was improvisation frowned upon or secretly revered? Some records suggest formalists hated it, viewing it as sloppy. But others imply that ad-libbing was a treasured art, especially in satyr plays. When the line between actor and fool blurred, Dionysus smiled widest. Back in Athens, the Festival of Masks transforms from a joke into a movement. Troupes begin calling themselves mask houses. Their performances blend tragedy and comedy until it's impossible to tell which is which. The chorus no longer chants. They whisper, clap, mimic, bark like dogs. There are no scripts, only outlines, no stages, only spaces. One group performs in a vineyard, another under the moon in the temple ruins. A third sets up in a baker's shop and delivers a love story entirely through the act of kneading bread. The people eat it up, not just the bread, the boldness, the freedom. Because theatre, they realize, doesn't belong to marble rows or laurel wreaths. It belongs to whoever dares to wear a mask and open their mouth. And Dionysus? He floats through it all like a breeze wearing sandals, never in one place too long, sometimes performing, sometimes just watching, sometimes pretending to be part of the chorus, then deliberately forgetting the lines. He calls it masking for sport. But something else is happening now too. People begin creating new myths, not just reenacting old tales of gods and heroes, but crafting stories from their own lives. A fisherman invents a tragedy about the one that got away. A merchant's daughter writes a comedy about her suitors, casting herself as all 3 of them in rotation. Even children get involved. One group performs a play about a dragon who's afraid of fire and a chicken who teaches it courage. The parents weep. The chorus eats cookies. The theatre is alive in every crack of the city now. And it's not just emotional, it's transformational. One man, famous for never speaking above a whisper, performs a full-throated comedic monologue about snoring. A widow, who hasn't left her home in months, joins a satyr chorus and stage dives into a pile of cushions. A teenage boy who's never cried watches a tragedy and doesn't even pretend not to. The masks aren't just hiding them, they're freeing them. Dionysus notices. He walks the length of the theatre after one performance, a tale about a lost memory and a singing fish, and he whispers into the air. This was always the point. Not perfection, not applause, but permission to pretend, to explore, to transform, and above all, to feel, no matter the season, no matter the shape of the story. The Festival of Masks becomes an annual event, but not on a fixed date. It happens when people need it, when the city feels heavy, or too loud, or too quiet, or when the stars hang just so and someone says, "It's time again, isn't it?" And when it is, someone puts on a mask. Someone opens a wine jug, and someone begins. Once, in a grove, there was a god who got very, very bored. The Festival of Masks becomes legend not because of its size or fame, but because it refuses to be captured. You drift through Athens now like a gentle wind passing between worlds. On the surface, things seem the same. Marketplaces bustling, scrolls being copied, olive oil traded, sandals repaired. But everywhere, just under the everyday noise, you sense it. Rehearsals, in corners, behind stalls, on rooftops, under fig trees. Everywhere someone is practicing a line, a gesture, a speech that no one's heard yet but will absolutely feel when the time comes. It's no longer just actors and playwrights now, it's everyone. The baker's wife delivers a 5-minute soliloquy about flour and fate to her cat every morning. The old fisherman down by the docks writes love songs to the sea, performs them to no one, and still gets choked up during Act 2. And Dionysus? He's moving through the city in his favorite disguise, just another performer. He's changed faces so often now, no one even wonders who he really is. He plays a fool in one scene, a chorus member in another, and, once, a rather convincing amphora who's afraid of being emptied. But he's watching, because now the question becomes, what happens when everyone becomes a storyteller? Your mainstream historical fact. As Greek culture expanded, theatre followed. Travelling troops brought stories to colonies, distant cities, even into foreign courts. The art form evolved not just in Athens, but across the Mediterranean. And while elite festivals remained polished, informal performances thrived in homes, streets, and schools. Your quirky tidbit? In some regions, teachers used short plays to teach reading and philosophy. Children would act out dialogues from Plato, not because it was required, but because it helped them remember. Pretend to be Socrates was both a lesson and a party game. And the scholarly debate, can you still call it theatre when the line between audience and actor disappears? Some say theatre must have distance, a stage, a separation. Others argue that true theatre happens the moment one person dares to show emotion while others witness it. The grove, the stage, the silence before the first word, these are all just containers for something bigger. Back in Athens, something new is happening. People are sharing roles. Instead of a single actor playing one part, a group rotates the same character. One delivers the angry lines, another speaks the regrets. A child sings the dreams. Together they form a composite, one soul in many voices. It's messy and breathtaking. Audiences begin to say things like, I saw myself in all of them. One play features a chorus where each member speaks a single word per line. No one knows what the other will say. It shouldn't work, but it does. Another group stages a tragedy about memory, performed entirely backwards. The actors begin weeping, then grow lighter, ending with childish giggles and warm bread. People leave those performances shaken, in awe, whispering, how did they know my heart looked like that? And Dionysus smiles, because now the theatre is no longer about the gods. It's about them, the people, their flaws, their obsessions, their wild imaginations, their desire to be seen, and, perhaps even more deeply, to be felt. Someone paints on a wall. We are the masks, we are the stage, we are the voice before the words. And below that someone scribbles, dedicated to D. The mayor of Athens tries to regulate the festival. He proposes fixed dates, approved scripts, pre-registered mask licenses. Dionysus shows up in disguise and delivers an improvised 2-hour play as a confused donkey who wants to be a playwright but keeps eating his scripts. The crowd roars. The mayor forgets his own proposal. The goat eats it. And so the Festival of Masks remains free, untouchable, wild and alive. In time, a strange thing happens. People begin dreaming in theatre. They see masks in their sleep. They rehearse conversations they never had. They imagine choruses narrating their grocery lists. They dream of confessing secrets beneath a spotlight that isn't real, but still somehow burns. Even funerals begin to change. Instead of silent mourning, friends perform scenes from the deceased's favourite plays. They tell their stories with laughter, tears, and sometimes, yes, even satyr masks. Because what better way to honour a life than by turning it into a myth? One man writes in his will, no priests, just 3 acts and a strong chorus. Surprise me. And Dionysus? He attends everyone, not as a god, not even as himself, but as someone in the back row, wearing a mask made of bark and ivy, clapping softly, whispering lines along with the chorus, because he knows now what he always hoped was true. Theatre isn't a thing. It's a fever. It spreads. It mutates. It infects with empathy. And once you catch it, once you speak a line not just with your voice but your soul, you never really go back to silence again. The years roll forward like a well-rehearsed line, familiar, inevitable, echoing slightly differently each time it's spoken. You drift now through an Athens grown older, wiser, a little heavier with history, but still humming with that low, bright energy that only comes from a city that's been taught to feel out loud. Theatre is everywhere now, not just in the marble seats of the great amphitheater or in the worn fig grove where it all began, but in the marketplace quarrels, in the rhythm of footfalls on dusty roads, in the lullabies sung with a flourish of dramatic despair. Children quote playwrights to get out of chores. Shopkeepers stage arguments about fish prices that may or may not be improvised. Couples write their own wedding oaths in iambic trimeter. It is a city in full bloom, but not the kind of bloom that sits quietly in a vase. The kind that sprawls, wild, uncontainable, and yet Dionysus begins to feel a new shift, not a decay, not a decline, but a drift, because as the generations roll onward, fewer people remember the beginning. The fig tree is still there, but now it's fenced off, considered sacred, historically significant. No one performs under it anymore. The masks are preserved behind glass. Scripts are copied neatly into scrolls with gold embellishments. Theatre is revered now. But reverence, as Dionysus knows all too well, is not the same as life. He walks the streets unnoticed, wearing a faded cloak, watching performances that are technically perfect, but somehow hollow. He listens to actors speak lines with flawless timing, but no tremble in the voice. He hears applause that sounds more polite than cathartic. And so once again, he decides to poke the fire. He visits a small troupe, 4 young performers practicing in the back of a wine shop. They're nervous. They've never performed publicly. One of them still forgets which side of the mask to wear. Dionysus, who introduces himself simply as Theo, asks, "What's your play about?" They fumble. "It's about people," says one. "And memory," says another. "And how you can love someone so much that you start to forget who you are." Dionysus nods. "Good. Don't change a word." They perform the next night on a broken pallet, using lanterns balanced on clay jugs. The audience is confused. The story is fragmented. The ending isn't an ending. The actors cry before the audience does. No one claps right away. But when they do, it feels like the first time. Your mainstream historical fact. As Greek drama matured, so did its structure. The Golden Age gave way to more elaborate staging, more rules, more stylized forms. Innovation slowed. Performances became polished, sometimes too polished for spontaneity to survive. Your quirky tidbit. Some philosophers like Plato distrusted theatre. They feared it encouraged too much emotion, too much imitation. Others, like Aristotle, praised it, especially tragedy, for its ability to purify the soul through catharsis. This ongoing debate kept drama firmly at the center of intellectual life, even when it made people deeply uncomfortable. And the scholarly debate here were the later periods of Greek theatre less true to the spirit of Dionysus? Did order replace ecstasy? Some argue the formalization preserved the art. Others argue it tamed it. But Dionysus doesn't write papers. He writes plays. And he knows the only answer is what the audience feels when the lights go dark. The little troupe performs again and again. Each time in a different part of the city, behind temples, in alleyways, at the harbour, even once on a moving cart dragged by an unusually philosophical donkey. Word spreads. Not about perfection, about presence. People say, "They made me forget where I was. They made me remember someone I haven't thought of in years. They made me feel like I was wearing someone else's heart." And with each performance, Dionysus sees something begin to spark again. One night, he's asked to perform. He resists, but they hand him a mask, unfinished, unpainted, still damp with dye, and he steps into the firelight. He doesn't use a script. He doesn't need one. He tells a story, a simple one, about a god who was bored once, who came to Earth looking for a distraction and found instead a reflection. A city of mortals who dared to feel so deeply they turned emotion into ritual, who masked themselves only to unmask the world. The story is short, but when it ends, no one moves because they've never heard it told like that, not from a book, but from the inside. The city begins to change again, not in buildings, not in laws, but in spirit. People start writing plays that no one understands, yet still move people to tears. They perform for audiences of 2. They leave masks behind on doorsteps attached to notes that say, "Try me on when you're ready." they begin whispering a new phrase. Every line is a prayer. Every silence is a choice. And Dionysus, he doesn't stay. He never does. He leaves that troupe a jug of wine and a new mask, wooden, simple, with a faint smile, and walks out of Athens just as quietly as he once descended into it. Because now, once again, theatre belongs to the mortals, and they finally remember what it's for, not applause, not legacy. But the moment a stranger's voice cracks, and yours does too, you drift now along a moonlit road far beyond the city walls of Athens. It's quieter here, no grand theatres, no carved marble stages, just open fields and the occasional whisper of owls nesting among olive branches. But even out here, miles from the chorus and fanfare, you feel it, a pulse, a flicker. Theatre hasn't stayed in one place, it's begun to wander. Villages once too small for festivals now host fire-lit performances in their town squares. Shepherds perform soliloquies to their sheep. A group of potters stages a comedy using only broken shards as characters. No tickets, no judges, just stories under stars. And Dionysus, of course, is never far behind. He walks these roads wearing a patched cloak and a walking stick carved with masks. Sometimes he joins in, playing the role of mysterious traveller with a tragic past. Other times he just listens, eats olives, and quietly weeps when someone forgets a line and laughs through their tears anyway. It is here, in these in-between spaces, that something unexpected begins to bloom. Not a festival, not a performance, but something softer, something shared. You see, a young girl in a village just outside Eleusis begins a tradition. She gathers her friends, hands them clay masks, and instead of performing for an audience, they perform for each other. They tell stories about what they're afraid of, and they act out the dreams they can't quite explain. They speak as people they've never dared to be. And when it's over, they take off their masks in silence and sit together. No applause, no critique, just presence. The villagers call it night masks. Soon it spreads. Your mainstream historical fact? While formal Greek theatre was centralized in major cities like Athens, rural areas developed their own folk traditions, often inspired by the larger festivals but far more intimate. These included dances, rituals, and short dramatizations tied to agriculture, seasons, and communal memory. Your quirky tidbit? Some ancient families kept their own private masks, passed down for generations. They were not for public performance, but for storytelling around the hearth. It was believed that wearing the same mask year after year allowed the ancestors' voices to speak through you. And your scholarly debate. Did private, small-scale storytelling influence the evolution of public theatre, or vice versa? Some argue that communal traditions like these predate formal tragedies. Others suggest they were inspired by watching large-scale plays and adapting the structure for smaller audiences. As always, the lines blur. Dionysus, naturally, adores this, because it's the closest thing he's seen in years to what first happened under that fig tree, the stripping away of spectacle, the lowering of voices, the leaning in. He begins appearing more often now, not as a god, not even as an actor, but as a listener. He's there when a boy performs a scene about losing his father before he's even lost him. He's there when two elderly women act out their first meeting, wearing masks of their younger selves, and laugh until they cry. He's there when a group of farmers, dirty and exhausted, take turns playing the spirit of the harvest and thank one another for surviving another season. These aren't performances, they're offerings, not to the crowd, but to each other, to time, to memory. And every time a mask is lifted and someone exhales, as if letting go of a weight they didn't know they carried, Dionysus feels it like a bell ringing through his ribs. One night, a young actor asks him, "Theo, why do we keep doing this?" He doesn't answer right away. He stares at the stars, at the circle of friends, at the pile of masks still warm from worn skin. Then he says, "Because sometimes the only way to tell the truth is to pretend." And the actor nods, because he knows what that means now. Elsewhere, the great theatres still operate. Tickets are sold. Dramas are critiqued. Marble seats fill, and Dionysus blesses them too. But here, in this forgotten field, beside this olive tree older than any city, he feels the root of it all still pulsing. And so he does what he always does. He plants a story, not in the earth, but in the air. He whispers it to a fig leaf. It travels from mouth to mouth, and by the time it reaches the next village, it's already transformed, longer, sadder, funnier, more real. Because that's how stories grow, not by being preserved, but by being passed. One voice, to another, forever. You find yourself walking along the edge of a quiet sea, somewhere far beyond Athens, far beyond where maps give names to places. The waves are gentle, lapping against sand that glows silver in the moonlight. But what really draws your attention is the sound of laughter and singing, and the unmistakable clatter of a chorus trying to get their timing right while standing ankle-deep in salt water. Yes, the theatre has reached the shore. Here, on this unnamed beach, a small group of sailors and merchants are putting on a play using driftwood as props and seaweed as costume accents. Their audience? A handful of villagers, 2 donkeys, and a sleepy pelican that may or may not be part of the performance. And yet, the moment is magic, because the story they tell. It's about homecoming, a sailor returning after years lost at sea, only to realize he no longer recognizes his homeland. The sand feels different.
The
Ferrant. The olive trees whisper a different tune. And when he puts on the mask of his old life, it doesn't quite fit. And as he speaks these lines, simple, heartfelt, slightly wobbly in meter, the crowd leans in. One man's shoulders shake. A child clutches her grandmother's hand. Even the pelican looks moved, because they know this feeling, this ache, this tide inside the chest. And Dionysus, perched nearby on a crate of sardines, nods gently. This is the theatre now. Unscripted, wobbly, true. Your mainstream historical fact. Greek seafarers played a major role in spreading culture across the Mediterranean. Along with trade goods, they carried songs, stories, and plays, many adapted for different languages and regions. Islands like Delos and Rhodes had their own local theatrical traditions, often performed in open air or on ship decks. Your quirky tidbit? Sailors were infamous for composing deck dramas during long voyages, mini-performances about their crewmates' imagined adventures, or overly dramatic fish stories. These plays often involved disguises, satire, and plenty of drunken laughter. And the scholarly debate, was the spread of Greek theatre a product of deliberate cultural expansion, or a side effect of storytelling's natural urge to travel? Some scholars credit colonization. Others argue that it was the human need for narrative connection that ensured its survival far from the centre. In other words, the mask floats better than marble. Back on the beach, after the final bow and the chorus collapses in giggles, something beautiful happens. The villagers rise, begin telling their own stories. No stage, no masks, just voices. A mother sings a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, but changes the ending so the baby grows up to become a playwright. A fisherman mimes the worst storm he ever faced, using nothing but a length of rope and a bit of dramatic coughing. Even the pelican contributes by knocking over a prop and accidentally improving the ending. And Dionysus, he's watching it all with that familiar soft grin. Because this is what he meant when he invented it all those years ago, not performance but permission. To speak, to be heard, to matter. As night thickens, a girl asks her father, "Why do we tell stories like this?" He kneels beside her and says, "Because sometimes we don't know what we feel until someone else says it out loud." The stars brighten. The tide hushes. And a new tradition is born, sea theatre. It happens whenever sailors gather and the moon is high. There are no scripts, just salt, wood, and voices. And every time a new performance ends, they leave a mast behind on the beach, made of rope or shell or driftwood, so the next crew can pick it up and carry it onward. Theatre, after all, was never meant to be kept. It was meant to travel. And it does, to mountain-top shepherd huts where lonely herdsmen sing entire tragedies to their sheep, to desert oases where caravans pause to perform sand-dusted comedies by starlight, to quiet fields where children draw masks in the dirt and recite lines from plays they don't fully understand but still somehow feel. And everywhere it goes, it changes because it belongs to whoever tells it next. One night, as Dionysus prepares to leave the beach, a young actor stops him. "Wait," the boy says, "you didn't tell your story." Dionysus blinks. "What story?" "The one only you know." And for the first time in a long while, Dionysus hesitates, because maybe even gods have stories they're not quite ready to speak aloud. But then, he smiles. He picks up a piece of driftwood. He balances it like a mask in front of his face, and he begins, "Once there was a god who was very, very bored. The driftwood mask is passed from hand to hand, island to island. You drift now across sapphire seas and dusty roads, watching as the theatre, that strange invention born from one god's boredom, sprawls across the ancient world. It becomes smaller in some places and grander in others. But no matter where it goes, it leaves the same thing behind, eyes that shimmer a little more than before. In Ephesus, a travelling troupe stages an epic entirely on horseback. The lead actor delivers monologues while galloping in figure eights, his mask bouncing precariously. Every time he forgets a line, he blames the horse. The audience roars. In Delphi, temple attendants incorporate oracle dramas into rituals, half play, half prophecy. The chorus murmurs riddles. The actors answer with questions. One priestess insists she's only acting, but then predicts a marriage in the front row, which happens 6 months later. In Corinth, a blind poet performs one-man tragedies where he plays every part. He doesn't wear masks. He just shifts his voice and posture with such aching precision that people say they can see the masks anyway. Dionysus, of course, is watching all of it. Sometimes as an old man selling honey cakes. Sometimes as a stray dog who just happens to sit in the front row and tilt his head at all the right moments. But he's noticing something new now, something beautifully strange. People have stopped waiting for permission to tell their stories. They've stopped asking who the audience is. They've stopped calling it theatre. It's just life now. A potter sings while shaping clay and calls it tragedy in slow motion. A group of old women recite their husband's worst habits while shelling peas and call it satyr improv. Two brothers settle an argument by acting it out, playing each other's parts, and halfway through they both forget what they were mad about. Your mainstream historical fact. Greek drama deeply influenced other cultures, from Roman performance, which adopted and adapted entire plots to Egyptian and Persian communities, where storytelling traditions wove in elements of dialogue, masks, and mimetic gesture. Your quirky tidbit? Some actors began embedding coded jokes into their performances, satirical references that only specific villages or tradespeople would understand. One famous carpenter-turned-actor was known for inserting accurate measurements into love scenes like, "My heart is yours," give or take 3 cubits. And your scholarly debate. At what point does theatre stop being theatre and become something else? Some argue the dilution of formal rules and ritual led to its decline. Others see this shift as its liberation, proof that the spirit of performance had escaped its marble skin and begun to breathe. In a small town nestled between 2 hills, Dionysus sees his favourite performance yet. No masks, no chorus, no script. Just an old woman sitting in a doorway telling a group of children the story of her life. She changes names, adds magical beasts, throws in a talking sandal. The children listen wide-eyed, clutching their knees. One asks, "Is this true?" The old woman grins. "It is when I say it." And Dionysus wants to cry and laugh and dance all at once, because that's it. That's the thing. It was never about being accurate. It was never about worship. It was about meaning that grows between speaker and listener, like ivy up a wall. And suddenly he realizes something. He's no longer needed, not in the way he used to be. They don't need a god to bless the stage, because they are the stage now. And the story, it keeps telling itself. He visits the fig tree one last time. Yes, the original one. It's still there, gnarled and sprawling, its roots curled around the stones like fingers resting on parchment. There's a little wooden sign beside it now. It reads, "Here once stood the first mask, but you are welcome to make your own." And under the tree, a box full of blank masks, some carved from wood, some shaped from wax, some painted, some plain. One is made entirely of grape stems tied with twine, and beside the box, a note weathered by time. Take one if you need it, leave one when you're ready. The story is still going, you are part of it now, and Dionysus, he takes nothing. He just sits under the tree, smiles and listens. Somewhere in the distance, a young voice begins, "Once, in a city of stone and sunlight, a god got terribly, terribly bored." You wander now through a marketplace somewhere between memory and myth, and everything smells like roasted garlic, damp linen, and the faint dust of time. People shout about olives. Someone drops a lyre. A goat escapes its leash and performs an unintentional pratfall that earns laughter from every direction. And just like that, theatre happens, because it always does, especially now that it's no longer confined to rows and scripts and sacred marble steps, now that it belongs to everyone. You pass a stall where two fishmongers are locked in what looks like a furious argument. They gesture wildly. One accuses the other of treason against haddock. The other cries betrayal and flings a mackerel like a dagger. But you notice something else. The grins, the timing, the chorus of apprentices repeating lines behind them like an echo. You realize slowly they do this every week. It's a bit, a sketch, improvised, polished, perfect. And the crowd that gathers, buying fish or not, knows the rhythm. They cheer at the right line. They boo the villain. They recite the final stanza like it's a hymn. Somewhere in the back, Dionysus watches. He's eating a fig. He's crying a little. He's not sure why. Maybe because this is all he ever wanted, and it's so much now. Your mainstream historical fact. By the Hellenistic period, Greek theatrical elements had woven themselves into everyday life. Public storytelling, impromptu performances, even debates and court speeches took on performative structure. The line between life and drama had blurred and stayed that way for centuries. You quirky tidbit? Some shop owners hired performers to advertise their goods through little street plays.
One tavern was famous.
Urn was famous for its daily wine-tasting monologue delivered by a drunken philosopher who ended every pitch by fainting into a real barrel. And the scholarly debate, did theatre evolve into culture, or did culture become indistinguishable from theatre? Some argue the art form dissolved into daily life, while others insist that the theatrical lens is what allowed ancient citizens to understand, critique, and celebrate their world. Either way, the mask didn't disappear. It just stopped needing straps. You continue down the road and find a courtyard where children are putting on a tragedy with hand puppets. The plot is complex. Someone dies off stage. Someone else turns into a tree out of guilt. One child forgets her line and shrieks, "I am overwhelmed," before falling backward onto a cushion. The audience claps wildly. No one knows what the story was, but everyone felt it. Nearby, a woman sells masks painted with whatever emotion you tell her you're too afraid to show. "Whisper it," she says, "then wear it for 5 minutes and leave it behind." A small boy buys one called Not Mad, Just Tired. An old man chooses Almost Forgave Him. Dionysus passes the table. He doesn't pick a mask. He just places his hand on the edge of the table, quietly. She nods. She knows. Further along the path, a chorus forms out of nothing. 5 friends walking home from work begin humming, then harmonizing, then narrating their day in song. Who spilled the olive oil, who made eyes at the baker, who forgot their line at the market stall. And other passers-by join in. Somehow, they all know the rhythm. Somehow, they always have. This is the final form of theatre, not institution, not ceremony, but thread, woven through every errand, argument, silence, and joke. It does not begin, it does not end, it erupts when needed, it whispers when words fail, it shouts when truths hide too long. And Dionysus? He's no longer the god of wine, he's no longer the god of
masks. He's the god of permission to feel, to speak, to become. People still speak his name now and then, usually with a laugh, sometimes with a toast, but mostly they live him, in every sigh between sentences, in every hand reaching for another's shoulder after a story, in every moment someone dares to say something true while pretending. At the edge of the market, someone scrawls in chalk, "The play is not over, there is no curtain, you are in it now." And you believe it. Because you are. Now the streets have grown quieter, it's dusk, and the sun lingers a little longer, as if even it doesn't want to miss the next scene. You drift now through a village with no name, under trellises of hanging grapes and linen, swaying in the warm breeze. There are no theatres here, but the walls hum with stories. You come upon a small home where 4 generations live under one roof. Tonight, the great-grandmother is the star.
They've pushed back the chairs, lit a few oil lamps, and arranged the grandchildren as her chorus, not to speak, but to hold props, mimic gestures, and gasp at all the right moments. She tells a tale about a goat who fell in love with a wind spirit. And yes, it makes no sense. And yes, someone keeps interrupting to ask what the goat's name was. But her voice trembles with joy, and the room fills with laughter, and a kind of reverence no temple could contain. No one claps, they just exhale together. And somehow that's more. This is theatre now, not a place, not a ritual, but a reflex. Your mainstream historical fact. In many ancient homes, storytelling was an evening tradition, a communal act that shaped moral values, preserved family history, and passed on regional myths. Though not formally classified as theatre, these sessions included dialogue, impersonation, and dramatic flair indistinguishable from stagecraft. Your quirky tidbit? Some families kept a story lamp, a small special oil lamp, only lit when it was time to tell a tale. It was said to keep stories from escaping too early. Children believed that if you lit it without a story ready, the lamp would whisper one to you in your dreams. And your scholarly debate, can oral storytelling truly be separated from performance? Scholars differ. Some claim it's closer to education than art. Others argue that performance is performance, even if your only audience is the dark, and the only stage is the space between 2 breaths. Back in the house, the children have taken over. One girl stands on a stool and declares she's now the goat. Her little brother insists on playing the wind spirit but gets distracted by his own echo. Someone adds a subplot about thunderclouds learning to dance. The great-grandmother just smiles and claps her hands like the conductor of a chorus made entirely of chaos and love. And you? You sit in the corner, invisible, a quiet witness, like Dionysus does now. He's stopped performing, stopped guiding. He simply attends like a breeze, like a hush before a line, like a heartbeat under the stage. Elsewhere, similar scenes unfold. A group of travellers sits in a circle, trading tales like coins, each one richer than the last. 2 lovers in a field rehearse an argument they'll probably have one day just to see how it might end. A farm invents a prayer disguised as a monologue and whispers it into the soil before planting his seeds. This isn't theatre as spectacle anymore. It's theatre as inheritance, passed in glances, in rhythms, in the way a question becomes a line and an answer becomes a laugh. One evening, a boy finds a mask in the dirt. It's old, worn, half cracked. He holds it up to his face, then to the sun. And without knowing why, he asks, "Whose story haven't we told yet?" And that question, that one simple line, sparks an entire village into movement. They write a play overnight. It's messy, too long. The plot wanders. One actor falls asleep during Act 2, but no one minds because it wasn't for perfection. It was for presence. Dionysus watches from afar, his shadow long against the twilight. He turns to the wind, maybe a friend, maybe a co-star, and says, "They've got it now, haven't they?" The wind rustles the grapevines like applause. He doesn't say goodbye, he just fades, because gods are loudest when they leave space behind. And anyway, no one needs him to appear anymore. They only need to feel that little tug, the one that says, "You could tell that story. You could wear that voice. You could become that person just for a moment." And when they do, the theatre lives again. Not because of marble, not because of masks, but because someone dared to speak and someone else chose to listen, and somewhere between the telling and the hearing, art happens. You walk now not through a city or a field, but through something gentler, like memory dressed in fabric and dusk. The air is warm with that low, still silence that comes just before a performance begins. Only this time there is no theatre, only really people, gathered, waiting, but not with programs or tickets, just open hands, soft eyes, and that quiet posture of readiness. This is the 8th Night Festival, though no one knows who started it or why it's called that. It just happens once in a while, always without warning. Someone says it feels like an 8th night, doesn't it? And suddenly the whole village knows what to do. They light candles, clear a space, gather scarves and pots, and maybe 1 or 2 goats, if the mood is comedic. And they begin. No scripts, no titles, only stories. Tonight's first tale is told by a boy who claims he dreamt of a turtle that taught him the language of moss. It's ridiculous. It's hilarious. It ends with the entire audience chanting, "Slow is sacred," and the turtle becoming the town's unofficial mascot. The next is from a woman who hasn't spoken in public for 5 years. She begins hesitantly, voice shaking. She tells of a song her mother sang while weaving, and how she hears it now in her sleep. Halfway through, the audience joins in, though no one's ever heard the tune before. And by the end, everyone is crying softly without knowing exactly why. You sit near the back, as Dionysus does now. Quiet, present,
invisible but known. And you feel it in your chest, the way you feel thunder before it sounds. This is what the theatre has become. A language without borders, a ritual without priests, a song sung in silence. Your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed that some festivals and rituals had no divine origin. They were simply human necessities. The rhythms of storytelling, feasting, mourning, and laughter were seen as sacred acts regardless of which gods were named. Your quirky tidbit? In some regions, entire towns would declare a day of pretending. Everyone had to be someone else until sunset. Bakers acted as generals, children as philosophers, goats as kings. If you broke character, you owed someone olives. And your scholarly debate, does art require intention, or is it art simply because it moves us? Some scholars argue theatre must be deliberate, a crafted performance. Others believe theatre is what happens when meaning emerges, even if by accident.
Tonight, the 8th Night Festival sides gently with the second camp. Later, a man with trembling hands performs a scene in which he is not afraid. He plays a hero, not with swords or roars, but by simply standing still, breathing and saying, "I forgive you," to a shadow no one else can see. No one speaks during his performance. But after? A young woman places a flower at his feet. A boy leans against his father's shoulder. Someone whispers, "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Dionysus doesn't clap. He just presses his hand to his chest and exhales. Because this is theatre distilled to its purest form. Not a spectacle, not even a performance, but a moment of transformation. Seen, heard, and held. The Fina. The final act of the night is always the same. No matter where the 8th night is held. Someone steps forward and says, "Once, long ago, there was a god who was very, very bored." And the crowd laughs, softly, lovingly. Not because it's new, but because it's theirs. They know this line. They've said it themselves. They'll say it again. It's the thread now. the gentle seam between myth and sleep, between the known and the imagined. And as the candles burn low and the night stretches out like a soft curtain, the audience doesn't leave, they stay, curled beside one another, asleep in chairs, on blankets, beneath stars. Because some performances are not meant to be walked away from, they're meant to be dreamed through, and you close your eyes too. Because this story isn't over. It's just waiting for your part. And now you arrive at the edge of the world, not because the land ends, but because the story does, at least this version of it. You stand beneath a vast starlit sky where the constellations themselves seem to lean closer, waiting for the next line. The wind is gentle, like breath over a sleeping shoulder. The ground beneath you hums, not with footsteps, but with echoes, echoes of voices, of masks, of laughter and tears and lines whispered into fig leaves long, long ago. There is no audience here, because you are both actor and watcher now. There is no stage, because the world has become one. All around you are the relics of stories told and retold, a mask carved into the bark of a tree, a clay tablet etched with a child's version of Oedipus, where everyone hugs at the end, a pair of sandals left near a riverbank, facing two different directions, like someone took a path they didn't expect. You find a small pile of stones, each painted with a single word. Someone's been building monologues out of them. You see phrases like, "I was once flame," and "he never returned," and "forgiveness tasted like figs." You kneel and add one of your own. It says simply, "Still listening." And just like that, you understand something Dionysus has known from the beginning. Stories don't die, they don't fade, they shift, they borrow new voices, they change costumes. They forget their old titles and invent new ones in the mouths of children and dreamers and sleepy old men by the fire. You look up, and there he is, Dionysus. Not as a god, not as a myth, but as someone leaning beside you, smiling like someone who's just seen a long-lost friend remember a shared secret. "You came all the way," he says, voice like wine and dusk and velvet. "I didn't know there was an end," you answer. He shrugs. There isn't, just quieter parts. He kneels beside you, adds another painted stone to the pile. It says, "Your turn." You smile, because of course it is. He stands, walks, vanishes into shadow, but even as he disappears, you feel no sadness, only warmth. Only the knowledge that the next time someone hesitates before speaking, the next time someone laughs through tears or dares to confess with a mask on, he'll be listening somewhere. And now it's you, standing in the center of a great invisible circle, not waiting, just ready. A breeze rustles the air. And in the distance, softly, "Hey guys, tonight we..." So now let your breath slow. You've wandered through fig groves and goat plays, moonlit amphitheaters and seashell stages. You've sat beside actors and children, storytellers and gods. You've listened to masks speak truths and watched strangers become reflections of yourself. And now, in the hush after the curtain that never fell, you're allowed, finally, to rest. The wind is soft, the stories are sleeping, and every performance, every line, every forgotten ending folds itself gently into a quiet kind of silence, the kind that doesn't erase but remembers. You are not the audience anymore. You are part of the chorus now, part of the breath between sentences, part of the old woman's tale, the fishmonger's argument, the child's trembling confession in front of a fig tree. And though tonight's story has softened into stillness, know this, it goes on with you, in every dream where you're someone else, in every whisper you give to the dark, in every time you feel a story pressed gently against the back of your throat, waiting to be told. So breathe easy now. You're safe in this space between myth and sleep. Let the vines curl, let the stars dim. Let Dionysus smile once more from wherever stories wait to begin again. You've travelled far, and now it's time. Let go, sleep, dream the next act.